A few days ago, I was sitting outside on my lawn chair with my dog. My backyard cement area where my chair was is about 1.5 yards from the exterior of my house. One of my bedroom windows was to the right of me, sitting in the chair. I was reading a book, sober. I'm adding this bit because I do smoke a bit, but hadn't at this time, with my dog laying in my lap. All of a sudden, though, I was startled at the sound of crying. It sounded like a woman crying, and then my brain registered that it sounded like me. I heard myself crying from my bedroom window. Once that realization set in, I just froze. My blood ran cold and I was unnerved, to say the least. Shortly after, maybe a couple of minutes, I grabbed my dog and walked in my back door and made my way to my bedroom. Obviously, I saw nothing. I live alone and I don't know what I expected to see. Some context to this that I think is important to know is that I have a cooler in the bedroom window and it was definitely off. The other bedroom window was closed and locked and looks out to my wide driveway. There's no way that it could have been anyone walking near the other window or anything like that. I recently lost my little old lady dog, who I love with everything. She was practically my whole life since I was 13. It's been a crushing grief, so I have been crying often in my room. I live in a ranch-style house with quite a bit of space between my house and my neighbors in a quiet neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of traffic or anything. I don't want to break the 9th commandment or anything, but I think it's important to know that I am skeptically open-minded. I come from a Mexican Catholic family. Talks around these things are not uncommon with my folks. I am spiritual and I have beliefs. I have my practices. I'm responsible when practicing divination, but I have never experienced anything like this before. It's been a couple of days since this happened, and I've been in my room to sleep, get ready for work, etc. I haven't felt anything off while in my room, but as of a few weeks ago, I have felt a deep need to lock my bedroom door at night. I just do it and trust my instincts, and I don't think about it too much because I don't want to feel unsafe in my own space. I spend time in every other room in my house during the day or evening, and I even work from home 2 days a week and am mostly a homebody. I don't feel anything off any of those times, even now as I sit in my living room at nearly midnight. But like I said, lately I felt the need to lock my bedroom door. I really don't know what else to add too. And as much as I wanted to get this off my chest and out of my mind, I'm also cautiously curious if anyone else has ever heard themselves cry in another room before, or heard of something like this. I'm a 20-year-old female and I work at a really bad prison in the south. It's a male camp and we're second in the region for being the most violent, really. Also, I work from midnight to about 8:30 in the morning. So, I was working uniform dorm and was always told that it was haunted, but I didn't really pay too much attention to it. It's the best dorm on the compound, so I felt that it was more to freak me out than anything. A few months ago, I was working, and any time that I was in there, I just had an uneasy feeling, like I'm being watched, that I don't have in the other, even worse dorms. It's about 2:30 in the morning now, and all the inmates are in their cells. So I go out to do a secretary check and walk around. I go to the 4th wing and get a horrible feeling each time that I work there. I go out there this night though, and it was weird. I mean, I get upstairs and completely forgot where I was and how I got there. It was weird because I never had a feeling like this before. It was like I completely blanked out the last 5 minutes. I was obviously confused and scared, but didn't freak out as I just got off the wing and went back trying to figure out what had happened. I didn't even remember leaving the officer station, and in the end I just went on with my night, but constantly felt strange. Anyway, a few weeks later, I worked there again and it was around 3 and I had to get people up for medication. I got everyone up with my sergeant and she left to go to the pill window. We had a fight happen on the compound, so no movement until it was over. so I tell everyone to go to wing 1 and sit down until they can go because they're all older and have walkers. I noticed, though, that I started hearing a noise, like a plastic lawn chair being dragged around, and I was like, wait, who's doing that? I check on the people waiting, and everybody is sitting in the wing, and I was looking to see if anybody was up, but didn't see anyone, and all the doors are locked. My staff bathroom is down the stairs from the officer station by the door leading out, and I go down by the door to see if I can see anybody, but I realize suddenly that the noise is coming from my bathroom. So I stood there and watched the bottom of the door for a second, and a light passes the bottom of the door, and in the end I just said heck no, and walked back up and waited for my other person to come back. Eventually I checked out the bathroom with them, and the plastic trash can was now in the middle of the floor, and I can assure you that there was no one down there. This is one of my experiences working night shift at the prison, and genuinely, it's the one that freaks me out the most. I'm 36 years old and male. My parents divorced when I was about 4 to 5 years old. During and after the divorce, my brother, Chris, my mum and we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment townhouse. Now, this is not the nice townhouse that you may imagine. It wasn't a complete dump per se, but they were older, built in the 60s. This is like in the 1990s and in a rougher part of town too. Something a single mother with 2 kids could swing. Now, the layout of the apartment is important to the story, so bear with me here. When you walk in the front door, the kitchen is immediately to your left and there's a short entrance hallway in front of you. The kitchen has an open countertop area that looks into a dining spot for a table and a split-level living room or den area that also had glass sliding doors leading to the backyard. No fence or privacy, mind you, where there was a rather sad and sparse-looking playground. In the hallway entrance again, on the right is a staircase leading up to my mum's and my brother's rooms. Now, one day after school, my brother and I are out playing in the backyard on the playground, doing our kid stuff, when my mum told us that she wanted to go to check the mail. The mailboxes of the apartments are located at the front entrance, which is on the opposite side of the complex far from us. Naturally, me being 6 and Chris being 9, my mum didn't want to leave us alone, especially since it was about dark outside. So we came inside and we got ready to leave. On the way out, I remember my mum asking Chris if he had closed and locked the sliding glass door. Chris said that he had. Cut to, and we're back from the mailroom. It's maybe been like 20 to 30 minutes max. It's hard to recall fully too, but my mum unlocks the apartment door. I'm lingering in the car for some reason or another. Chris doesn't notice that I'm not in the apartment yet, and on the stairs leading to the bedrooms on the right, he sees someone's feet disappear at the top of the landing, as if somebody were running to hide. Thinking that they're me, he doesn't think something's off, and Chris goes to the kitchen. I actually go upstairs directly into our bedroom to get ready for the bed-bath routine in the bathroom. My mum is at the table in the dining area, near the split-level living area downstairs. While I'm completely clueless getting ready for bed in the bathroom, Chris from downstairs keeps hearing someone walking around in my mum's bedroom. Now, I had a bit of a bad habit when I was this age of going through people's stuff. Not maliciously, I was barely 5, just curiosity, but Chris, thinking that I'm being a nosy little turd, going through all of our mum's jewelry, etc., runs upstairs to catch me in the act and get me in trouble. Chris runs up the stairs, sprints across the hall to my mum's bedroom, and throws himself stomach first on the bed. And when he looks up, he sees a tall, slender man with a bright green Goblin latex Halloween mask on, and is holding a large knife that he had clearly swiped from our kitchen. My brother sits silently in shock as the man in the Goblin mask raises one finger to the mouth, indicating for him to be quiet. And in true form for my brother, he absolutely screamed for our mother. Now, obviously I had heard things going on by this point, but I have no idea what it actually is, and am not aware of what's happening. I've gotten into my big oversized sleep shirt, and am going downstairs to have a glass of milk before bed. When Chris screamed, the man instantly ran downstairs and encountered my mum, who immediately jumped into action. Our baseball gear was in the living room, and my mum grabbed a bat and started fighting this man in our house while he's taking swipes at her with the knife. I first noticed what's happening when I've come downstairs to the kitchen, pulled up a step stool to reach the counter and pour a glass of milk, and that's when I see over the bar the guy push my mum off the steps into the split-level living room, landing on her back. She starts swinging the bat wildly, trying to make any contact with it, and eventually she does. I am absolutely glued to this image, truly frozen in place, not scared, but just so young that you can't fully process what you're seeing. The man finally runs toward the front door, which is right by the kitchen. I'm mid-pouring my glass of milk, frozen, milk continuing to spill out all over the counter and floor. He then stops and turns directly to me, and in that green goblin mask with the knife, screams a primal deep sound of rage and frustration, and then slams the door so hard that the whole place shakes. I continued standing on my stool, pouring milk everywhere, frozen for, I don't know, could have been a second, but felt like longer than that. And honestly, I really don't remember what happened after that, but all of the parts that I've relayed, they are very clear to me. Moral of the story, be sure to lock your doors, and don't just assume that your kid did. So I finally had sleep paralysis for the first time in my life a few months ago, and boy, was it a very, very strange experience. So I'm in my 40s, and though I'm sober now, and have been for a very long time, I experimented with psychedelics and classic dissociatives in my youth. That being said, I've been in a lot of very different altered states in my life, and this was by far the strangest headspace that I've ever occupied. Though I have wanted to experience it in my life, I was wholly and pretty much entirely unprepared for sleep paralysis. It is an intensely alien and strange and unique experience. There is nothing else like it in this world, and it is the visual and spiritual embodiment of someone plucking violin strings at max volume for eternity. It is a very pressing, daunting, and inescapable and terrifying space. So, I was laying in bed in a limbo between dreaming and reality. I could feel myself laying in bed and experiencing the environment around me, my snoring cat, the oscillating fan, the glow of my alarm clock. I was still very present in the world before us right now, and although I could nearly reach out my hand and grab deep, meaningful, dream-filled sleep, I was just not quite there yet, when I glance over at my window and see a thin-skinned, grey, sort of greeny, veined arm with very thin flesh reach in from the top left of my window. It dug its claws into the wall to push itself in. It had long, pointed claws, thick at the base as if this thing uses them regularly and fiercely as tools. I start to kind of freak out because, what the heck, right? But I try to talk myself down. I'm dreaming. It's not real. I've prepared my whole life for this moment. Let's see how it plays out. This, being or alien or demon or whatever, I don't really know, crawls into the window as if the world had flipped up on its side and it was crawling up into my bedroom. It's very much like as if Spider-Man decided to wall crawl in for a visit. It's moving in patchy, sort of jerking motions, like it's operating in a different frame rate of reality, I guess. And just like that, it's standing at the base of my bed suddenly, down to the left, just out of reach, watching me. I could feel its gaze on me like a crushing lead-filled blanket. It was the most oppressive and terrifying thing that I've ever felt. And, I've run into a bear and large cats in the wilderness before, and have been hit by a car even, but this was way worse. This 4-foot, bug-eyed, slender grey-green thing with talons just oozed fear, along with this immense power. Waves of it just came from it and washed over me, and it was like it was purposefully projecting these onto me, like an attack, and honestly, it was working. I keep trying to talk myself down because, this is not real. Like, haha, you guys got me, but I know it's just a dream, try again next time. And after a moment, it's no longer standing there. I'm in the clear. I think to myself, wow, what a weird experience. I can see why people think that this stuff is real. But then it happens. It was like the roof just suddenly fell on me. This immense force, and I see it at the base of the bed grabbing my ankles and trying to pull me out or something. It's snarling, and boy, has it got some pretty gnarly teeth. I can sense it wants to take me with it. I can feel those talons biting into my ankles. I start to try and fight back. I feel it slip a little and adjust its grip and grab a little higher up. It does not want to let me go. And then suddenly, I'm awake. It's gone, but I can feel as if it had just been there. And honestly, I think that this was the most terrifying part about all of this. Just how real it felt, even after I was awake. Like, it was still there and I could just no longer completely perceive it. I can't help but remember how real all of this felt. Like this thing is probably still out there hunting people in the astral plane or something, just wanting to feed and knowing it still can even if it is detected. Because really, there is nothing that its prey can do. I want to talk about this because no one in my family likes to discuss this because they say it feels too negative and like something bad will happen. Basically, I was home alone with my daughter. My husband works night shift and it was maybe 1 a.m, so he was at work. My daughter was asleep in bed next to me and I decided to turn my phone off and go to bed. And as I started to settle, I heard my dog jump up and it sounded like she was getting attention from someone, so I opened my eyes and saw my husband bent over, petting her. Now, my husband works in a warehouse and wears a very bright reflective vest. At first, my heart dropped because I knew no one should be there. Then I saw his vest and I thought that it was him. The only problem was that something felt very wrong and I knew that he shouldn't be home yet. I stared at him and he looked up and smiled at me. I'm not sure when I fully realized, but I knew that this was not my husband. He was at work. So I shut my eyes tight and refused to open them. I felt hands moving up my legs all of a sudden, and once it reached my thighs, the hands were suddenly gone, and my daughter woke up screaming. Motherly instincts kicked in, and helping my daughter was far more important than hiding from whatever this was. So I jumped up and grabbed my phone as fast as I could. I shone the light around and tried to console my daughter, and all she kept saying was, "Daddy, no," over and over again. And while screaming this, I suddenly realized that we were home alone. This has never happened before or afterward, and really I don't know what this thing was or what it wanted, but I found this place and I wanted to share my story. I'm also going to add that I've been asked if this could be sleep paralysis, and in my opinion, I really don't think it was. The timing is questionable, I'll admit it, but I definitely felt like I was awake and, I don't know, with sleep paralysis, aren't you supposed to be asleep? I don't think that this falls under that category, and I'm sorry I can't give more information, but this is all that happened. I still get the creeps whenever I share this. It was the middle of the night when I woke up to this sort of light tapping at the window across from my bed. The room was decently big, with the bed pushed up against the wall in the center of the room, and 2 smaller closets to the left on either end of the wall. A window was next to the closet, in the far left corner of the room from the bed, with a TV beside it. And before I went to bed that night, I turned on the light rain sounds on the TV, and so it was playing queasily in the background while I set up my bed. I was pretty tired and weary that night too. The knocking, though, turned into loud thumps that made my heart race suddenly and my palms sweaty. By the sound of it, I could have sworn someone or something was standing outside the window pounding at it, which wasn't unreasonable considering the room was on the first floor near the entrance of the building. Looking at the alarm clock on my bedside nightstand, I realized that it was suddenly very unreasonable though. It was 15 minutes past 3 at this point. Really too, I just don't understand how I missed it because she was standing right next to it. Beside the window, or rather a little bit in front of it, was a girl with long, dripping wet black hair cascading down her face and body, basically hiding all of her from how long it was. She was wearing this worn-out white dress that ended on the floor. I couldn't see any limbs at all, and she really reminded me of that girl from The Ring, just less TV-like and obviously real. For a good 10 seconds, I kind of just stared at her, waiting and watching, praying that this was some sort of sick nightmare that I was about to wake up from. The panic hadn't set in just yet, but when I realized that she wasn't moving or doing anything, I slid under the covers, biting back the tears of fear. I was 14 then, not young, but not old either, so the fear was pretty reasonable at that age. After taking a few deep breaths and encouraging myself to look again, suddenly she was gone. She just vanished. But the tapping on the window hadn't yet ceased. If anything, it got a bit louder for a sudden. It also started raining after a few minutes of me just sitting there, staring at the spot where the girl once stood. Eventually, everything went quiet, and I think that was when everything really set in. Suddenly, I was extremely fearful. This happened when I was 11, visiting a lighthouse in Michigan that was supposedly haunted by a boy. My parents, they wanted to take a tour with the tour guide, but I wanted to play outside, considering that we had been touring various sites in the Upper Peninsula that day for some time at this stage. No one was around, so my parents ended up letting me play outside the lighthouse while they took a very quick tour. As I played outside, I really beat up a ball rolled up to my feet. I bent over to pick it up, and as I stood back up, I saw a boy standing next to the edge of the lighthouse, just sort of looking at me. I assumed the ball was his, so I tossed it over to him, and he wandered away. I didn't think anything about it, but when my parents were done with the tour, they asked what I did, and I told them something along the lines of, I was just wandering around and, oh yeah, I helped this kid get this ball back. The tour guide was with my parents, and when I mentioned the kid, he looked startled because, as I mentioned earlier, there really was nobody else but us at that lighthouse. Only 3 cars, my parents' car, the tour guide's car, and the car belonging to the person at the front desk. The tour guide asked me to take a look at a picture, one in the lighthouse. I know that this sounds super cliche as well, but when he showed me that picture, it was the picture of the exact same boy with the exact same beat-up ball that I had seen. Apparently, too, that kid had died at the lighthouse. On a side note as well, we did check around, just in case there was a kid around, but as far as we could tell, there was nobody. So, you might be asking though, why was this creepy? Especially considering that the boy never scared me or tried to scare me or anything. Well, what creeps me out the most is that I know that I touched that ball. When it comes to ghost stories, most people only report a ghost, right? Not other objects. But assuming that was a ghost with his ball, what the heck did I actually touch? I mean, it felt solid, like a real one. If it was a ghost ball, then how the heck do you explain what I touched? This element to this story, it still bothers me to this day. This happened to me when I was 15. Also, I'm female. To put this into context, I was living in a pretty big house in a very safe and popular district. Let me tell you a little bit about the house too, because it has some importance to this story. So we were 5 living there. My brother, then 17, my sister, 17, and usually my parents, along with myself. There was a ground floor with my sister's bedroom, a very large room which gave to the garden by a large patio or window sort of door thing, a nice room with computers, a TV and some jewelry. Then you go up 1 floor and you have the living room and the kitchen, the first bathroom and the parents' bedroom, and again TV in the living room, jewelry in the bathroom and the parents' room, and even some money in the drawers as my father had to pay for important work on our heating system and planned to pay in cash. Why? A good question, but he might look at me strange if I ask now. The third and last floor, that was my bedroom, my brother's bedroom, and the second bathroom and the sauna. And yes, look, I know it seems pretty luxurious to have this sort of thing in your house, but all the houses have it where we lived. And to be honest, we only ever really used it as a wine cave anyway. But anyway, let me jump into the story now. So, it was not a dark and stormy night by any means. It was dark enough, but it wasn't like an unsettling night by any means. Around 5 p.m, and the world was pretty black by now, as it tends to be in this country in winter. My brother and sister, they were not there that night, sharing a class and were constantly still at school. My parents, on the other hand, they were in France for some administration issues they needed to sort out. They hadn't been home for about a week at this stage. But I was there. And as any self-respecting teenager would do, I was in my bedroom, the rest of the house in complete darkness, just sort of chilling. I had my headphones on, watching a movie in my bed. There was a light on in my room, and it's important to note that my window gave to the street. Half an hour passes, 1 hour, I'm still deep into my movie. Obviously, I can't really hear anything in my house because I have my movie on. But I lift my eyes from my screen and suddenly I see my doorknob turning. It was all very quick, but I take off my headphones, thinking that it's my brother or sister, and the door opens. Suddenly, though, I am facing an unknown man in my house. He's young, 20 or so. He looks at me, I look at him. There's 2 seconds or so, and he slams the door the hardest that he can. I'm on my feet in seconds, and I was a pretty dumb teenager because I immediately opened the door, only to find 3 men running down the stairs, and obviously I didn't know any of them. So I'm frozen in fear for like 5 to 10 minutes. Eventually I go down the stairs to the kitchen where I can grab a knife. Slowly I explore first my parents' room. It's a complete mess. There's drawers open, papers, clothes, everything. And there is the money. There's the jewelry. There's the TV, the computer, which was so weird to me because nothing had been taken. I proceed to the other parts of the house, calling for my brother and sister. They don't answer. I decide to call my best friend, who speaks the country's language that we live in, so that she can call the police for me. And the more that I proceed through the house, the more that it is an absolute mess. But again, nothing has been taken. Absolutely nothing. They broke through my sister's window patio door, and there was broken glass everywhere, but in her room too, nothing was taken. The police came with some dogs, and we did finally tell our parents after everyone else, but they never found the guys in the end. Again, being a stupid teenager, I used the opportunity to miss school the following day. Although I wasn't really that traumatized, I guess I was just more curious at the time. But still, the whole thing just doesn't sit well with me. I mean, why break into a house and there's jewelry and money and everything available to you and you don't take it? What was their reason for breaking in? What was their motive? When I was 16 and my sister was 14, we used to go to our grandma's house every day after school to take care of her barn cats. And before we went, we always stopped at this one and only little grocery store in our town, and we would get a soda and some little Debbie cakes and dispose of the evidence in the barn burn barrels so our parents wouldn't get mad. One day though, we were in the store and my sister and I were at opposite ends of an aisle. I went to walk around to the next and I was looking down at the floor like I always do. I have social anxiety and I avoid eye contact at all costs. So I saw a pair of worn brown boots first, work boots like all the men in town wore. Nothing crazy, but then I saw jeans worn too. And it felt like slow motion, but then I saw the hands, swollen, bulbous and wet, pale white like a dead body. I immediately felt chills run down my spine and I continued looking up. It felt like slow motion, but I saw this button-down red flannel shirt. And then that was when I saw his face. It was like it was melting. His mouth was just a black hole and I believe his eyes were too. I didn't look for more than half a second before my flight instinct forced me to turn around and walk back down the aisle. I wanted to run, but I was so scared that he would chase me if I ran, so I very purposely kept my regular pace and walked to my sister before I turned around to make sure that he wasn't following me. Thankfully, he wasn't. I told my sister, "You need to go down the aisle and look to your left right now." She was laughing, thinking that it was a cute boy or something like that, and I'm like, "Dude, no, I'm being serious, you need to look." So she walked down and I stayed a few paces behind her. When she reached the end of the aisle, she froze, staring in front of her like she was seeing a ghost. Her fear response was to freeze, and I said her name and she didn't react. She was completely frozen at this stage. I tried again and she didn't answer, so in the end I grabbed her arm and yanked her, and we both ran as fast as we could back down the aisle and to the other side of the store. We were both shaking by this point. I asked her what she saw, and she described exactly what I had seen. Whatever it was not human. There is no way that anybody could ever convince me that it was. And the energy around it was so foul and rotten. We had both had experiences with the paranormal before, but genuinely it was nothing like this. We looked around to see if anyone else was scared, but everyone else was just being normal, like they hadn't even seen it. I told her that we should ask them to check the cameras, but she said no way that they would let us and they'd probably just call us crazy. I knew that she was right about that too, so in the end we just left. Then that night, she woke up and saw it, standing in a doorway, so she squeezed her eyes shut and didn't open them until morning apparently. I never saw it again personally, and I'm convinced that the second time that she saw it, it must have been sleep paralysis, a nightmare or hallucination from the fear that she'd felt earlier. We went to Catholic school at the time, and so my sister was so affected by this that she went to speak to the parish priest. Unfortunately, he was no help at all. He said people in our state, we went to a school in the next state over, are crazy, and it was probably just a guy in a mask or something. And if I have ever been sure about anything in my life, I know that it was not a mask. I know that. I don't know what it was, but whatever it is, it wasn't human. To this day, my sister cannot speak about it. It affected her a lot, and she's scared to talk about it because she's worried that it might draw it back towards her. I don't really know why I'm sharing this, but I guess because I need to talk to someone about it. Because the only person who would actually believe me, because she saw it too, she just cannot talk about it. So please, do let me know what your thoughts are about this, because I need to talk to someone. I would like to preface this by saying that working at my job has completely changed my perspective on the paranormal. For context, I work at a vintage store that specializes in old, antique Western American artifacts. The store is located in a wealthy part of the state, where a lot of wealthy people buy in bulk to decorate their second and third homes. This means that we have a lot of sourced items being moved in and out of the store at all times. I'm not part of the sourcing by any means. I simply sell items and help manage the store. But most, if not all, of the items obviously have sort of energy attached to them, I guess. Not always good either. Within 3 months of working there too, I knew that it was haunted and that the resident spirits had taken a liking to me. With the coming and going of items, certain energies and events occur and stop too. Now, things were sort of weird from the beginning, I guess, but I always chalked it up to being a somewhat old building. One morning I was opening the store on my own. It was the dead of winter and everything was very dark and snowed in. But the moment that I walk in, it is absolutely freezing. I think that the heater conked out in the night. I go to turn it on and see that it's working perfectly fine though, and the warmth that it's emitting seems to be dissipating after a couple of feet. I ignore it and turn on the main floor lights. I walk downstairs where it's pitch black. This is where we keep the majority of our vintage items. And before I can turn on the lights, our music turns on at full blast. Problem is that the music isn't an automatic system. I mean, I control it myself from my phone, and I had yet to turn the system on. I was the only one in the building and around the general vicinity, so no one else could have turned it on from their phone. After calming down from the scare, I turn on the lights to discover that all the pillows have been thrown off of our massive vintage leather couch. I still think it's weird, but I'm trying to rationalize it by saying maintenance must have come in the night to fix something, and they did that. I clean them up and walk upstairs again to find all the lights are now turned on. I clean them up and I walk upstairs again to find that all the lights that I've just turned on have suddenly gone out. The light switches are switched off again, not just the power too. Again, I ignore it and turn them on again and walk outside to open the front door and turn our open sign on. And this is the moment where I realized everything. Our locally made chapstick display, a heavy thing, gets completely swept off the shelf, like someone aggressively pushed it off in front of me. To be clear too, it didn't fall, the shelf didn't budge, it was pushed off 100%. 50 to 100 chapsticks go flying everywhere, and the acrylic case shatters into pieces. The music system suddenly starts playing the music very loudly again, and honestly, I'm just frozen in shock. Things suddenly go very quiet though. It was as if it or they just wanted me to finally acknowledge it. The computer screen turned on seconds later, as if it was telling me to get to work now, and I think I must have stood there for a solid 10 minutes, just frozen, not knowing what to do. Now, on another occasion, and this took place around 4 months ago, our main vintage collector had brought in old vintage mirrors that he'd found in different places and constructed a wall of them on the side of the stairs going down. I came back from vacation, slightly horrified to be honest. I feel like mirrors just hold really bad energy, especially ones owned by other people before. But it was a normal day at work, helping customers, logging inventory, etc. One of the employees was working with me and we were casually chatting about life. Eventually, she went downstairs to help a customer with finding the price on a vintage fur coat and some artwork, I think. It was when the customer's daughter is walking upstairs, aka passing the mirror wall, that she suddenly screams. I, being the person in charge, run toward the screen to check on everything. This girl is inconsolable though, and claiming that she saw a shadowy figure in the mirror. The mum is calming her daughter, saying that it's just a shadow, sweetie. I investigate and I don't see anything. Just the normal bad feeling that I experience passing those mirrors. We help this lady and she eventually leaves with her items. A couple of hours later, a different woman wants to buy a wall coat rack right by the mirrors. As I'm using the drill to remove the coat rack, and my coworker is holding the other end of the coat rack, her face suddenly pales. She's staring at the mirrors and can't look away. I see her do a double take and continue to stare at them. Obviously, I'm concerned and finish helping this lady out. Immediately after she leaves, I return back to my coworker who is still just staring at the mirrors. It's as if she was in a trance sort of state. I shake her out of it and she can't speak. It's only when she said my name and I look back at the mirrors that I see the same figure. A morphing figure, subtly taking on different appearances. Some feminine, others masculine, no face, just features. Used to these things around here by now, I drag her upstairs and sort of ignore it. The rest of the day, though, I heard from multiple customers about how they thought that they were seeing things in that same mirror. One girl even threw up in the bathroom because she said that she suddenly felt so sick walking downstairs. When I came back for my shift the next week, it was gone. My other co-worker had informed me that apparently it didn't sell, but one of the other employees walked down one day to find it cracked. I don't know what happened to it or where it went, but the rest of the mirrors are still there. All of the relatively younger employees seem to experience things too, but not as much as I do. The older employees, they don't seem to experience as much, but they agree that there are weird things that happen here. We also have some seemingly nice or playful resident spirits, I guess you could call them. They like to flick light switches on and off, make knocks that can't be blamed on the building, play with the building's temperature, and mess with items on shelves and all that. Occasionally, they like to make messes and play tricks too, throwing pillows off couches, Jellycat stuffed animals being rearranged in the night, make sounds to scare people, and sometimes switch the music playing and play with the volume levels too. Generally, things that happen here are harmless, not to mention that they love to play with our security camera system too. But we've had the cameras and the electricals looked at 1,000,000 times and they all work fine, but things will stop recording and cut out all the time. In any case, on another occasion I was approaching the end of my shift, which means cleaning up and organizing the store for the next day's employees. I clean up our vintage toy area and walk behind the shelves to organize our vintage Levi jeans rack. I hear it clatter and go to investigate, thinking that something had just fallen over. Kids place things back on shelves in precarious situations, and things fall all the time. Not always because of the activity, is what I'm getting at. So I walk over to the toy corner and see a knocked over toy train, standing up though, which was a bit weird. This thing doesn't run on batteries or anything, it's super old, but I watch as it starts moving at a moderate pace, out of the corner and into the next aisle section. Once again, it's just a model train. No strings, no batteries, no track, nothing. It stops after about maybe 6-ish feet of movement. After my initial internal screaming, I decide to leave it there for whatever is moving it. I hesitantly ignore it and go back to cleaning. No more sound or movement, and right before I close up, I put the train back on the shelf. On another occasion, I sold a customer an old turquoise sort of Native American ring. It was on sale, so no returns. A week later, she calls though and begs for a return. She drives literally an hour back to the store and says that she doesn't want the ring anymore. I think to myself, someone regrets spending the money they did and I get it. But then she goes on to say that things have been so weird in her house since she bought it. She said that her cats were acting up, the house was making weird noises, and doors were closing on their own. I wasn't supposed to take it back due to policy and all that, but we worked something out in the end. I mean, she seemed so frantic. Sometimes you'd think someone is making something up to get their money back, as it happens in retail, but genuinely, she seemed really scared. And based on my experiences working at my job, I didn't doubt her either. Nothing happened in particular after we got the ring back, luckily. It was sold a little bit later to a collector, and we didn't hear anything after that, but still, it was a weird situation. Now, this story is not my own. It's actually my friend's who was visiting at the time. She came to visit me at work. She wanted to try on some vintage clothing, so she goes into the dressing room to try it on. While she's doing that, I go into the next room over to show a customer the bathroom. But when I come back, my friend is sort of shocked to see me walk back into the main shop area. She looks back behind the counter and then back at me, sort of confused. I can tell that she's processing something. She asks, "Were you not in the back room just now?" And I'm confused, seeing as I wasn't and my coworker left early. Now, my friend is a very practical human being. She has to see it to believe it sort of thing. That's her philosophy anyway. But she then goes on to explain that the backroom door, which is slightly visible to the customers, was halfway closed. And she said that there was a shadow matching my height and size, making noise back there and moving around. She said that she thought that I was back there grabbing items. She said that she thought that she heard me respond and say "aha" too at one point. Mind you, nobody else was back there and no other customers had come in at that point. When I went to take a look, the figure back there, or whatever it was now long gone. Nothing seemed out of place, but she was absolutely convinced that I must have been back there. Anyway, these are just some of the experiences from this place, and like I said, this place has changed my perspective on things for good, and I don't think I'll ever be the same after working here. This happened a couple of years ago, but I often think about it and what this person's intentions truly were. So, a couple of years ago, probably 2018, me, a 23-year-old male, I was outside of my mother's house close to midnight. It's dark in the neighborhood, nobody is outside, and it's quiet and pretty chill. I'm smoking by my car, just listening to music and vibing pretty quietly, when I see a person walking up the street towards me. Nothing to be alarmed about, but she gets close. She's a cute mid-30s woman, sees me smoking and asks if I have a cigarette. She was friendly enough, but I say no, unfortunately I don't. But we have a bit of a nice quick chat. And I mean, every young man has fantasies of a cute woman walking towards them looking for something, right? And I mean, you never know, but definitely just a fantasy at this point and wishful thinking. But during our quick chat, probably only a minute or so, she says, "One moment, let me take this call." So she calls her husband, I guess. Don't recall how I knew that, but it was her husband. I believe she must have mentioned him in our chat at some point. This is a bit of an old memory, like I said. But this next bit is what creeped me out. She says on the phone, quietly, sort of under her breath, "Hi, honey. Oh my goodness, I think I found one." She was excited about it, but in a sort of weird way. Hard to explain, but it definitely sounded sinister. It creeped me out and gave me red flags immediately. Plus, I'm thinking, found what? I already said that I didn't have a cigarette. Plus, she was just walking around the streets. She and her husband are looking for something? What does that even mean, right? So, while she was still on the phone, I just turned around and went inside, and I locked the door. Really, I don't know what to think of it to this day. What could she have meant? I mean, best case is that she wanted like a three-way with her husband or something, which I'm not into at all, but worst case is that they were going to rob me or do something awful and weird. What do you think her deal was? Do you think that I overreacted, or was it a good call in the end? When I was about 3 years old, I'm 41 now, my family, mum, stepdad, older sister and I, moved into a rental home in a nice neighborhood within our small town. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and was way bigger than the house that we came from. However, even though I finally had my own room, my sister and I decided to continue sharing a room and a bed. I think we both felt a bit weird in the new home, but my mum just figured that we'd shared a room for so many years that we were comfortable and would eventually grow out of it. This incident, it happened when I was between the age of 4 and 5, and my sister, she would have been around 8 or 9. Now, the way our room was set up was our bed was in the corner of the room against the wall, and my sister, she slept close to the inside against the wall, and I slept on the outside. We had an oscillating fan against the wall that aimed toward our feet, and just outside of our door was the hall with the bathroom right across the hall. Now one night, my sister woke up to use the bathroom, and for some reason, I felt the need to wake up and look down by my feet. And standing there, at the foot of the bed, closest to my side, was a dark silhouette of my sister. I couldn't make out any facial features, as it was just a dark void of a silhouette standing still there. I could see the fan rotating from behind her, but noticed the strands of her hair didn't move once the wind hit us. I called her name and got no response. Called her name again and again, but there was no answer or movement. When I looked out into the hallway, I saw the bathroom door closed and the light in the bathroom was on. And as soon as the bathroom door opened, it was gone, and my sister walked into the room. I remember that I was absolutely terrified and began crying. My sister came in and made sure that I was okay, and eventually I must have fallen asleep. My sister eventually came in and she made sure that I was okay, and eventually I must have fallen asleep. But even that young, I remembered the experience the next day, and it would stick with me for all these years. I was a 9.5-year-old boy, so this happened a decade and a half ago now. It was summer vacation, the time was noon, and I just took a shower. Towel wrapped around my waist and dripping wet, I was feeling happy like a good naive boy. I went into my bedroom, which I shared with my parents. I was picking out clothes and nobody was in the room with me. Almost as soon as I walked in, though, I could feel the ground vibrating, which was weird. As I picked clothes, I felt the vibration was coming from behind me, around my parents' bed. It went on and off like a cycle almost, but each time the vibration came back stronger. I wanted to ignore it and go about my happy day, but eventually I just couldn't ignore it anymore. I put on my shorts, and with t-shirt in my hand, I turned around to see what was going on. It was exactly as I imagined. My parents' bed was shaking for no discernible reason, and it seemed to be coming from underneath. The shaking got so bad that other objects started to shake from the bed, hitting the ground. Then, all of a sudden, it stopped again. But this time, right in front of me, I saw this weird creature crawling out from underneath the bed, about a meter or two away. It was pure black, the blackest thing that I've ever seen in my life. In fact, it was so dark that it was hard to discern features on this thing. It sort of looked like a goofy 2D object, but it definitely had 2 legs, a torso, 2 arms, and a head. It didn't know that I was there, I think, in the room, staring at it. It was about my size, and sort of seemed to look around for a second. At the time, I interpreted that as it brushing its shoulder off after crawling. But then, it suddenly stopped. Its eyes turned to me, and I could see fear almost. It seemed to be scared of me more than I was scared of it. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was maybe a fraction of a second. Then, without even moving one bit or making any noise, it just disappeared from my existence, like just blinked out of existence. Obviously, I was terrified. I ran out of the room and I told my parents. They came to check what was going on, but in the end I don't know if they believed me or not. My theory is that if it was real, it was an extra-dimensional creature that I saw that day. And yes, after that, my day was completely ruined. When I was young, me and my family moved into this pretty old house in England, and it was in pretty bad condition when we moved in, so we had to do some renovations to fix it up, and for personal reasons, I had to share a room with my mother, and this is where I would experience most of the ghost stuff. As you came into the room, this is what it would look like. On the left is a wall, and on the right was my little bed. Hugging the left wall was my mother's bed and a small nightstand. And also, this all took part over the course of about 7 years. So, it started off slow, such as me and my siblings seeing someone at the corner of our eyes while we would play board games late at night, or just feeling like we were being watched. Eventually, though, it evolved to actually seeing it often. Now, although I shared a bedroom with my mother, I would keep all my toys and stuff in my brother's room, so we would often be in there late at night playing or talking. And every time that I would leave the room, the exact same toy would come launching off the shelf it sat on and land at my feet. But my parents, they were big believers in the paranormal, so they would tell us to ignore it and don't pay attention to it. Obviously, we never listened. From there, it would get worse, and it seemed to be targeting me. One night, I was asleep in my mother's room as usual when I suddenly woke and was sitting up. I opened my eyes, and through the little light in the room, I could see a short figure standing by my mother's nightstand and hunched over, staring at her. I didn't have time to pay attention to the details, since I immediately started screaming and crying, so loud my mother woke up thinking that I was being murdered, and as soon as my mother woke up, the figure disappeared. She calmed me down and put me back to bed, and honestly I thought it was over, but that was really just the beginning. From that point on, it would be a nearly nightly routine, at least 4 times a week. I would wake up in the middle of the night, sit up and look over to my mother's nightstand, and see the exact same thing. Some sort of figure standing over my mother, and again I would scream and cry and so on. Sometimes my mother would leave a little bit of light turned on for me on her nightstand, but that didn't help either as the figure would still come back night after night. Eventually I managed to identify what it was too. It was a little girl with blonde hair, in a dark blue dress with light blue patterns and flowers on it. Even though I could tell what I was looking at, it still absolutely terrified me, and I would still scream and cry nearly every night. Sometimes it would be in a different spot instead of next to the nightstand, such as standing by the door, looking at me instead of my mother, and sometimes closer to my bed. Eventually, my mother got tired of me waking her by screaming and crying, and she went to see a psychic. This part is crazy, I know, but she described what was happening to us every night to the psychic, and the psychic told my mother that it's a little girl called Samantha that has been following my mother since she was a child, and she acts as a guardian angel of sorts. That's why she was always watching over my mother as she slept. The psychic also drew an image of the little girl, which my mother showed me once she came home, and I immediately started bawling because, I kid you not, it was the exact same girl. We have since moved out of that house and I no longer live with my mother, but I do have plenty more experiences from that house and in others that I've lived in. This happened in February of 2020. I live in the central Arkansas area for reference too. So my buddy's grandparents owned some farmland about 15 to 20 minutes outside of our town, and we would regularly spend the night out there on weekends with some of our other friends. We would make a fire, drink, etc. And this particular weekend, it was just him and I. It was pretty dark by the time that we got there, but it was the standard fare. We had decided to set up the fire on the dirt path that ran from my friend's grandparents' house through their field to the woods. But this day we built the fire closer to the middle of the field. Not long after we get the fire started, we sit down and get some music going and crack open our first beers. He turns off the music and notices something in the sky behind me. My back was facing the woods, so I turned to look. There was a bright light in the sky above the tree line. I wasn't too weirded out by this, and neither was he. However, I had never seen a star that bright before. I opened up his stargazer app on my phone that I had had forever, thinking that we were close to a planet or something. But before I could even point my phone in that direction, the star suddenly moved. At this point, we both froze. The light moved quickly and smoothly to the right, without any bobs or waves or anything, and was utterly silent. That was when I noticed that the light was coming from some kind of flying vehicle, and was actually much closer than we thought. It was probably 300 to 400 feet away, flying above the woods. This thing was also incredibly fast, too fast to move that quietly without making any sort of noise. It was dark though, and I couldn't make out exactly what the vehicle was, and the bright light emitting from its side sort of obscured any good look. But it moved perfectly parallel with the tree line, just right above it. And it was like it had left when it noticed that we had noticed it. We continued watching as the UFO just quickly and quietly moved on in a straight line until it was beyond our sight a few seconds later. We just sort of looked at each other like, what the heck was that? And began to discuss what we had just seen, sort of in hushed tones like we were dreaming. 20 minutes or so later, we hear a noise coming from the sky and see two loud planes flying side by side, going exactly the direction that the UFO had gone. At this point, we started to think that it was a military drone of some kind, and we didn't see or hear anything else that night, so we thought that it was that. I still think about it every now and then though, and I don't know, the whole military drone just doesn't really add up to me. I decided to share this in looking for some other people's opinions, so what do you all think? What do you think it could have been? I, a 29-year-old female, used to do some street performing when I was low on money, and at the time of this story, I was 25. I had recently lost a lot of weight and needed to save some money for skin removal surgery. This was due in addition to buying all new clothing and seeing a chiropractor because of the changes in my gait affecting my spine. Pro tip, by the way, is that losing weight is really expensive. I don't know why nobody warned you about that, but yeah, that was my experience anyway. So, this was a Friday night and I was in a college town near the state university with a lot of bars and restaurants around. Because all of my clothes hung off of my body like a tablecloth, I was wearing a decorative scarf tied into a dress, and it was a little on the revealing side, but it certainly didn't look as sloppy as the rest of my clothing. If you don't wear decent clothing and makeup and such when you street perform, people assume that you're homeless and can be really terrible towards you. This is relevant to this story. So, I was tuning up my guitar, sitting in a camping chair outside of a couple of bars, and at around 8:30 p.m. this beige SUV pulls up and parks in front of me. The guy driving it hopped out and approached me. "Hey, do you want something to eat?" "Oh, no thanks, I'm okay, but thank you." "Okay." And he got back into his car, but instead of driving away, he just sat there staring at me. I thought it was a little bit strange at the time, but I was focused on getting warmed up, so I didn't initially worry about it too much. I was only planning on staying out until about midnight anyway, so I wanted to maximize my time. It was the end of the dinner time, beginning of the bar time rush, so it took me a little while to realize that the beige SUV was still there, and the guy was still sitting in the driver's seat, staring at me. I'm pretty sure he didn't even pay the parking meter in the end. Anyway, at about 9:30, he hops out again. "Hey, are you hungry yet?" "No, I'm okay. I ate before I came out here." "Come on, I want to give you something, but I don't have any cash. Let me buy you dinner." This does happen. When someone who doesn't carry cash sees a street musician that they like, they will often offer to buy a snack and bring it to you, so I didn't find that too strange. "Okay, sure. If you want to bring me a snack, that's cool." "Okay, come with me." No, I mean, I'm not leaving my spot here. There's a really good restaurant I want to take you to, though, but it's too far to walk. We need to drive there." "Sorry, I'm not really interested in going somewhere. I need to stay here and make some money tonight." "I thought you were hungry, though. Come on, let me buy you dinner." Me, starting to get frustrated. "No, look, I told you I'm not actually that hungry. If you want to tip me with something other than cash, a slice of pizza from the place across the street or a soda or a cigarette or something, that I'm fine with, but I'm not leaving this spot, okay? No, I'm not going to buy you a slice of pizza. If you want dinner, you need to come with me. At this point, tons of people were walking past us, and I was getting really annoyed at him for keeping me from playing music. Well, I'm not going anywhere, and I need to make some money tonight, so I'm done talking about this. At that point, I started playing my guitar to show him that I was done with this conversation. I probably should have been more concerned by this point, but I was honestly just a little bit ticked off. It wasn't that uncommon for men who saw me street performing to offer me food or shelter in exchange for sex, so I kind of assumed that that's what he was after at this point. And for about the next hour, I focused on just playing music and chatting with people, and it was actually a pretty productive night in the end. I had almost forgotten about the creepy dude until he got out of his car and leaned against the door, still staring at me. At this point, it's almost 11 p.m. and it dawned on me that he had been there for over 2 hours. That was certainly when the alarm bells finally started going off in my head. I had a hard time focusing on the music after that because he was just sort of standing there, staring at me, and the longer that it lasted, the more I felt like he had something more nefarious than just trying to bribe a young homeless woman to sleep with him in mind. At about 11:30, I realized that I needed to do something sooner rather than later. It was pretty much peak bar hour, but the streets were going to become less crowded eventually, and I was going to need to walk home at some point. I certainly didn't want to risk him following me. Now, when I'm street performing, I'm in friendly mode, and I'm not the most intimidating looking girl in general, so I don't think that he was expecting me to confront him directly, but when I feel threatened, I tend to get pretty mad pretty quickly. Figuring that I had plenty of witnesses, I walked right up to the guy, angry as heck by this point. "Look, why are you staring at me?" Taken aback, he says, "What? You've been staring at me for 3 hours now. Do you just like making younger women uncomfortable?" I was mad, talking progressively faster and louder, and it was very clear that this wasn't going the way that he expected it to. No, I just want to buy you dinner." "So you're just waiting for me to get hungry enough to go get dinner with you, when I've already said no several times? That's not being helpful, it's being creepy. And look, I know that there aren't any restaurants still open at like 11:30 p.m. around here anyway." No, this one is. It's still open." "I don't care if it's still open because I don't want to go anywhere with you, and I told you that. So why are you still here waiting?" "No, you don't understand." He looked like he was racking his brain for an excuse at this point. What? What am I not understanding about you staring at me for the last 3 hours?" "No, you see, I'm an Uber driver." Of all the stupid excuses that he could have picked, this was possibly the dumbest. Me pretending to understand. "Oh, okay, I get it. You've been waiting all this time for someone who ordered an Uber." Yeah, that's it." Me dropping the act. "And you were just going to leave them waiting while you took me to a restaurant then?" What happened next freaked me out more than anything else that night, because as soon as I blew a hole through this guy's story, it was suddenly like he took off a mask. His smile disappeared, and his voice was deadly serious as he climbed back into his car and said to me, "Okay, you'll never see my face again." And he drove off, fast. I just stood there in shock. And look, I'd had plenty of creepy encounters while street performing, but not like this one. It was impossible to convince myself that he was going to do anything besides abduct me. I was done after that too. I decided to order an actual Uber home instead of walking, which cost about half of what I'd made in the tips that night. And in the back of that Uber, counting my cash, I realized then that it was time to retire. The small amount of money that I made during the daytime was not worth the effort, and the decent money that I made at night was definitely not worth the risk anymore. I've since moved on to a new side hustle and also developed agoraphobia, diagnosed by the way, because of this and other incidents like it. I hate leaving the house alone, and I order most of my groceries and household supplies through DoorDash now. and I have a job that's only 3 blocks away from my apartment. Still though, on my walks to and from work, I find myself constantly checking my surroundings, using the reflection in the storefront windows to make sure that I'm not being followed. Honestly too, I really hope that this creepy guy in the SUV keeps his promise and that I never see his face again. I grew up in an old house in the UK. My family home is a 4-story terrace, just over 250 years old, situated on a busy street. It was originally a manor house with lots of land, but was split into 3 terraced homes with more built sort of alongside of it in the late 1890s to early 1900s. There were 2 cellars, basement rooms, 2 living rooms on the ground floor, and the kitchen. The first floor had the bathroom, my parents' bedroom, and my brother's bedroom, and the second floor was my bedroom or living space. Now, I have experiences there from being very young that I may share in the future, but for now I'll focus on some experiences that happened in my family home from me being around 15 to 16 to my early 20s. When I was around 15 to 16, I was up in my bedroom reading. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I lived with my parents, obviously, my younger brother, 2 years younger, and our dog. I had no music on or TV this day, but I could hear general muted traffic noise outside. At some point, I heard someone come in downstairs, the door opening, closing, and keys rattling. My mum shouted hello up to me and told me to come downstairs because they, Mum and Dad, needed to talk to me about something. This was weird, as usually she'd just tell me whatever it was that I needed to know if she was shouting up to me anyway. I asked why, and she shouted back, "Just come downstairs," in a sort of frustrated tone too. So I did, thinking that it must have been important or I must have done something wrong or something. I got downstairs and quickly became confused though because I couldn't find them anywhere. I shouted hello, in case they'd gone into the cellar. This wouldn't be normal either, but nobody responded and I was confused trying to work out where they might have gone. I thought that I must have been imagining it though and started to walk back upstairs when my brother shouted down from his room asking me what Mum wanted because it was weird that she called me down. I replied to him saying, "Did you hear her too?" Obviously I assumed that he must have, but I was just a bit weirded out because this meant that he'd heard her too, but I was sure that there was nobody there and I was second guessing myself, I guess. But then he didn't respond, so I walked up to his room to talk to him about it. I opened his door and he wasn't there either. It was then that I got this weird chill sensation and goosebumps and started to feel a bit spooked, so I left his room and went back downstairs trying to make sense of what had just happened. Weirdly too, just as I got back downstairs, my mum suddenly walked in with the dog. She'd taken him on a walk and I asked her what happened and where she had gone. She was confused and assured me that she had been out for around an hour at this point and had not been back at any stage. She said that my dad was at work, he had been out since 8 a.m. and was due back in a few hours' time, and my brother, well, he was allegedly at his friend's house. On another occasion when I was 20, I was working in an off-license sort of convenience store. The store closed at 10 p.m, and once we closed, cashed up, cleaned up, etc., I'd get out at about 10:30, home for around 11, still living at home at this stage. My mum called me at 10:10 p.m. asking me where I had gone, and obviously I was confused and told her that I was still at work locking up, and she said that I had come home 15 minutes ago. Her and my dad were in the front living room and they heard me come in. A little bit of context here too is that we used the back door to come in and out and had 2 living rooms, one at the back and one at the front. My mum and dad would be in the front room, which was closed off, from the other, and the stairs were in between them. Mum said though that they had heard me come in, shout hello, which we normally did when any of us came home. Mum and Dad both said hello back and asked me why I was home so early. They said that I shouted, "So you're ignoring me then?" in a sort of jokey way, and they heard me walk upstairs chatting on the phone with someone. My dad then came upstairs, first floor, and shouted up to me to see why I was home so early and to check that everything was okay when he noticed my light wasn't on and it was silent. So he came back down and they called me and found out that I hadn't been there at all. My dad rushed upstairs to make sure that nobody had broken in or anything, but there was nobody around. On another occasion when I was around 20, my mum and dad were sitting in the living room quite late, 2 a.m.-ish I think, and heard my brother practicing his guitar in his room. This wasn't unusual as he would often practice for hours. They were enjoying listening to him play faintly when they both remembered at the same time that he was in university, living in student accommodation 200 miles away, and he had taken his guitars with him. When I was around 22 years old, my best friend was visiting at one stage. It was a Friday night. I had been quite unwell, so she was coming around to chill, listen to music, chat, etc. My parents were out at a function this night, and it was mid-January-ish. My friend went upstairs to use the bathroom, next to my brother's bedroom, and when she came downstairs, she said, "Oh, your brother has just shouted you for something. He must have thought that I was you when I came upstairs." My brother, though, was back at uni, and we were alone in that house. I asked her if she was certain that she heard him, and she was adamant that she had, to the point that she really thought that I was trying to spook her for a laugh. She knew of the above occurrences and they freaked her out. I told her, though, that he wasn't there and that he was at uni. She didn't believe me, in fact, and demanded that we go upstairs to see what he wanted. She was 100% convinced that she had just heard him. So I shouted, and obviously I got no response. She said, "He mustn't have heard you." So I invited her up with me to prove that he wasn't home. She confidently came with me, still certain that I was joking around. We got to his room, I opened the door, the light was off and his things weren't there, and obviously neither was he. She turned a bit of a funny grey colour after that, and she wasn't okay. I'm a 16-year-old female who lives in a very, very small town, and this happened about 3 months ago. Now every morning, I would go out to our yard and drink some coffee and watch the sunrise. And one morning, a guy with dirty brown hair and a dirty face came walking by. He waved at me while I sat there, and of course I didn't want to be rude, so I waved back. This continued for about 3 weeks until one afternoon, while I was playing with my dogs outside and saw him. He was just sort of, I don't know, like standing there and watching me. I waved, but I never really saw him this time of the day, so it was a bit odd to see him, but he waved and then just walked away. I didn't think too much of it. But then, the morning that I'll never forget, ever, I was sitting outside and, as always, he walked by, but as I waved at him, he came to my gate. I sort of froze a bit. He started small talk, and slowly I started to get up, a little bit scared, but not too bad. He told me to wait, and stupidly I waited. My dog started barking at him, and he said, agitated, "Your dogs are very mean, you know. When I tried to get in, they wanted to bite me." I stood there sort of dumbfounded, and honestly I wanted to cry. Then he told me I'd rather stay safe and keep by my pets. And I kid you not, he pulled out a rat from his pocket, a dead one. At that, I had had enough and I ran. And since then, I haven't gone outside again during those times. I grew up in a tiny town with a long history. Think a bit west of North California, Gold Rush land. As to not dox myself, I'll make sure to keep it vague, but the house that I grew up in was about 120 years old. Now, as a child, I frequently complained to my mum about the faceless man in our living room. He was a completely black figure, with somewhat distinguishable features, but he was just so shrouded in darkness that You couldn't really tell who he was. It was kind of like a Victorian silhouette in that you could make out the approximate size and shape of his facial features, but they were darkened and blurred beyond any real recognition, outside of a broad approximation of certain features. I saw him in the living room almost every other day. Seeing him never really went away as I got older as well, but I developed significant sleep issues when I was 14, so my family chalked it up to hallucinations from sleep deprivation. I was tired of feeling crazy, even when I did get adequate sleep, so the faceless man became a bit of a secret. I would just rush past the room that he'd be in and try to stay out of the living room as much as possible. I, weirdly enough, became used to his presence despite how horrified I was of him. Nearly 10 years after I first saw him, my family moved out of that home and, so strangely, I never saw him again, the faceless man, after that. I tried to forget about him until one night I got a little bit drunk with a childhood friend and she felt the need to admit something to me. You see, she used to come by my house for sleepovers quite frequently, but one night she had a terrible time and seemed to be quite sick for the rest of the slumber party. She never really gave a full explanation of what happened until this drunken confession. It was then that she told me that when I left the room for some reason, she wandered into the hallway and into the living room. She was walking forward with her head facing the other way, looking behind her towards my dog, and when she entered the living room and turned her head forward, she said that she was standing directly in front of a man without a face. She claims that she panicked, closed her eyes for a moment in fear, and when she opened them, it was gone. Now, as far as I can remember, I never told her about the faceless man out of embarrassment and fear that I actually was going insane. When I told her about what I saw all those years as a child, her face grew quite pale. I hear shadow people are very common apparitions, and many online sources give a variety of more logical explanations for them, but I wanted to share this regardless because I would really like to know if anyone else has had any similar experiences. Back in 2009, when I was in my early 20s, I'd often go on late-night walks with a friend. We lived in a seaside town in the UK, and our walks would take us around the outskirts of the town. We only drank on weekends, and these particular events took place midweek whilst we were stone-cold sober, for what it's worth. So, we set off from my mum's house at around 9 p.m, and after walking for about 30 minutes or so, we stopped to pet a cat that was here. We were beside a building that had a big glass front. I was stroking the cat when my friend said, "What the? That's creepy. Look in that window." I glanced up and there was an old man sat bolt upright in a chair at the back of the room in complete darkness, just staring outside. We watched him for a while and he was completely still. My friend even pondered whether the guy was dead or maybe a mannequin or something. We eventually moved on, and after that our night got even stranger though. You see, we made our way past the town's dump, outdoor clothes, around the town's boating lake and down towards the estuary. It would have been nearing 10:30 at this point. We wandered past some really lavish houses that overlooked the place and then arrived at a narrow wooded line that goes right down to the estuary. Normally on this walk, we just ignore the lane and keep going past the houses, to the top of the road and back into town. But on this night, we decided to wander down to the water's edge. As soon as we set foot into the lane, it immediately got darker due to the tree coverage on each side. The only source of light was at the end of the lane. We were completely silent, just sort of trudging down the lane and feeling really horrible. It was cold and the apprehension sort of came out of nowhere, I guess, but as we got to within about 20 yards of the water, we both stopped at exactly the same time with no communication. I was suddenly staring at a shape that I could make out down the bottom of the lane. At first I thought it was a signpost, but as my eyes focused, it seemed to me more like a broad figure, and it had a big head that stood about 7 to 8 feet in height. I was trying to rationalize in my head when my friend broke the silence and said, "Do you see that thing down there?" I replied with a yes, and without any further communication, we both turned around and dashed back up the lane. It was only 20 seconds or so until we got to the street, but the whole time the back of my neck was cold and I felt like I was being chased. Once back on the street, we began walking, thankful for the streetlights lining the pavement. At this point, we started talking again. Both not only saw the same thing, but we also felt the cold and sensation of being chased. We both remarked on how, without communicating, we both instinctively turned tail and got out of there as fast as we could. We both described seeing the same eerie shape of what appeared to be something bipedal and absolutely massive, shrouded in darkness like a shadow. Yet there were no shadows down there because of the tree coverage. It was almost blacker than a shadow, if anything. But there was like a density to that dark shape as well, like a void. In any case, we went back to my place and we just watched some South Park to wind down. My mate then left and I insisted on him texting me when he got home, which as two young men is something that we never did. Male privilege and all that, I guess. Now, I had an appointment at a mobile retinal scanning clinic the next day. This happened to be taking place in a car park next to the house that we saw the old man in. I went to this appointment and met up with another friend who lived nearby. As we rounded the corner, I glanced at the house that we were at the night before, and it was now completely empty. No furniture or anything. I mentioned to my friend about what I'd seen the night before, and she said, "Well, that's weird because my mum used to clean for the old couple that lived there, but they died a few years ago and it's been empty ever since." Man, when I tell you that goosebumps were all over my body, that is a complete understatement. In the 90s, my dad bought an old house that had a barn attached to it. A lot of houses in Germany, especially in the smaller villages, are like this. The first few years were totally fine as well. In 2003, my dad started to remodel or rebuild the house, and that was when it started. First, it was just weird little things, such as banging, things falling over, water faucets being turned on, toilets flushing. We just shrugged it off, saying that it's an old house and blah blah blah. I never felt comfortable there, to be honest, though. I always heard something right above my room, the attic, and sometimes it sounded like furniture being moved. But there were only 2 to 3 old chairs and a really heavy old oak closet up there. It was huge as well. Dad always told us that it was probably just squirrels. Pretty big squirrels, if you ask me. But well, time went by and we didn't think too much of it. I met my now husband on MySpace and we Skyped every night. Due to the time difference, 6 hours, one morning my now husband said, "Oh, they're up early." And I said, "Who?" He said that someone just walked through the hallway. My heart was about to explode when I heard that. No one was up at 3 in the morning, and as I turned to the hallway, the whole fixture of the living room curtain, which was mounted to the wall, just fell off. I got pretty scared by that. He knew about all of this stuff though because I had told him about it. And he said, "Just go and check if everyone is asleep and just lay down." I hung up, and as soon as I was upstairs, I checked everyone and they were all sleeping. From there too, it kept getting worse and worse. In the morning, all kitchen cabinets and drawers were open. Basement door was open, and that door was always locked because it had an old well down there. At this point, everyone got and felt very uneasy. It even happened when we had visitors over too. lights flickering, doors slamming shut. One of my mum's friends is very spiritual, and her best friend is Native American, and she said she talked to her about it and that she would be more than happy to come over and do a cleansing. My mum said absolutely, but I called the Catholic priest and I'm waiting for him to call back. He called and said that it wasn't the first time that he was called to this address, and also that he won't be coming back. He seemed honestly pretty upset that the sellers didn't mention why they never kept the tenants for longer than a few months. He apologized and just said that there was nothing that he could do. My mum asked him then if at least he knows what happened or what it is. He said that all he knows is that around the 1900s, a farmer and his wife owned the house and the land. The wife always wanted children but was never able to get pregnant. They were both lovely people apparently, but one day her husband left the house to go to the market, and a little while later his wife heard lots of screaming. Someone banged on her door, and her husband sadly was run over and apparently died. Ever since that day, she became bitter, especially unfriendly to kids, and didn't talk to anyone anymore. Sadly, she did die bitter as well and alone in that house. Mum was like, "Oh, that's great, thank you." And after that for a while, nothing seemed to happen all of a sudden. Everything just went quiet and almost back to normal. Until my sister-in-law announced that she was pregnant. And it all started over, but this time, much more aggressive. Windows fully open now, dishes flew out of the cabinets, stuff was thrown down the stairs, and the closer it got to the birth, the crazier it got too. It got so bad that both of my sisters slept with me in my room. One night I heard my brother scream as well. We ran into his part of the house and he said that a shadow figure came down the stairs from the attic. The stairs to the attic were in this bathroom, and went right under the baby crib, and it tipped over. From that night on, we all slept together in the living room. The next day, my mum called her friend again. At this point, we were absolutely terrified. Even my dad, who's still the biggest skeptic ever, was pretty scared. Next day, this beautiful lady came over with Mum's friend, and she looked at us and said that it's feeding off of y'all's fear. Truthfully, too, we hadn't slept right in months. She asked if we wanted to wait outside or come inside. I assumed that we were all scared for her, and we all told her that we'd go in with her. But before we went in, she, I guess, cleansed us or blessed us in her beautiful native language, and gave us some sort of bean to hold or put in pocket to protect us. I wish I could remember the name of that, but she walked in and said, "Wow, it is strong and it doesn't like me." We went from room to room. She had a tray with like several different items on it. Sage, obviously, and something that was already burning. A feather, I think, and something else as well, but I don't remember. Anyway, as we approached my brother's studio or apartment section, she kept getting louder and louder, and I didn't understand her native language, but in between she would tell us that it's trying to hide and it feels cornered. The next stop was the attic. One by one we started to go up, and all of a sudden the door swung wide open and a 2x4 board came full speed flying right towards us and almost hit my brother-in-law right in the head. And then there was this loud boom. It just felt like the whole house shook as well, like an earthquake. My siblings went out with my dad and brother-in-law. Once we were up there, we see the big oak cabinet was pushed over, and the 2x4 was ripped out of the wooden structure from the roof. The lady got pretty hectic at this point, and then said that it's not here anymore. It must be downstairs. The only room that we hadn't been in at this point was the laundry room. She went in there alone, and she was really loud at this point. In fact, everything felt so loud. After what felt like a really long time too, she came out and said that apparently it put up a fight. She had ashes all over her and looked really drained, and she said that apparently it kept blowing the ashes on her, trying to put the fire out off the tray. I'll never forget that day, ever. This kind lady as well didn't want anything for her work. She came back a few days later to tell us that the lady who owned the house was trying to protect us, especially my sister-in-law, since the thing was after her unborn baby. I moved to Tennessee a few years later. My siblings went to college across Germany, and so my parents sold the house, peaceful as it could have ever been. A couple of days ago, someone actually broke into my house while I was asleep. I work night shifts, so sleeping during the day is pretty much something that you have to learn to get used to. At around 6:30 p.m., I heard what I thought was a loud knocking sound coming from outside, and my dog's going absolutely ballistic. For reference, I live on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. My closest neighbor is like half a mile away, but anyway, I somewhat wake up, but don't really think anything of it since my neighbors like to shoot their guns, and this was during hunting season as well. As I start falling back asleep, my heart started fluttering weird, like I knew something wasn't right. And that was when I heard footsteps throughout the house. The dogs are still barking, but starting to quiet down. That's when I really began to worry, because I thought my dogs would protect me in a time like this, but a fat chance of that. The footsteps stop on the other side of my bedroom door, and just don't move. I think that this is how I'm going to die, and although I had a weapon in my room, I knew that I couldn't get to it without being heard. It felt like an eternity before the steps moved around and towards my brother's room. Rustling could be heard loudly through the house and things being thrown. I knew then that they were in my brother's room, and some of his friends are into like seedy situations, and I knew it had to be one of them. I heard the footsteps coming back to my door, and the doorknob handle moves. It was then that I immediately turned my back towards the door and closed my eyes tight. I also had a hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. The door opens, but that's it. Then he leaves as a car drives down the road. I finally bucked up my courage and get out of bed. Everything in the house, except for my brother's room, was undisturbed. I immediately called my brother and asked if any of his friends were coming over. He said not that he knew of, and I told him what happened. He got off the phone with me to start calling around. I went back to bed and noticed that I still had my window cracked open from earlier, and realized that I had my sheet off of me wearing only a t-shirt to bed. And if it was who I think it was, this wasn't a random event. You see, one of my brother's friends has always had eyes for me, and the fact that he saw me sleeping and in just a shirt kind of makes me freak out a bit. Whether or not he just took something out of my brother's room or knew that I was home alone sleeping before having to work later that night, I don't actually know. I'll share an update though when I hear from my brother. You move out to the country to get away from activity of the city life and let your guard down, but that's when something like this happens, right? Sometimes country life, it isn't so safe after all. So I've been having sleep paralysis issues for a long time, like since I was little, and I would often have nightmares that lead to sleep paralysis. I don't think that my sleep paralysis is a normal kind too. Like, I think something paranormal is happening. And when I search the things I've experienced on Google, nothing ever really pops up, nothing useful anyway. So I've decided that after waking up from another experience, and I think it was the most horrifying experience I'd ever had, I was going to share it here and try to get some answers from all of you guys. So, this all started when I was about 5. I was playing dress up alone in my room. when suddenly my soccer ball rolled out of my closet. I picked it up and went to put it back. I walked into my closet and put it on the shelf where it was. When I walked out, I went back to playing, but in the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange. I turned to look at it, and it was a pitch-black, tall and skinny humanoid figure. It was hunched a bit since it was too tall to stand up all the way, and it just stood there, menacingly. After some seconds of us just seemingly staring at each other, I guess it just hit my 5-year-old mind that this thing isn't supposed to be here. I quickly ran out of the room and ran into my older brother's room and stayed there until it was my bedtime, and then he forced me to go back into my room. I laid there trying not to fall asleep since I was so scared of that thing, but eventually I ended up falling asleep. When I fell asleep, I had a dream that I don't remember what the dream was about, but I remember waking up absolutely terrified. I was so scared, in fact, that I went into my parents' bathroom and just slept in the bathtub. My parents weren't home at this time. They were away for a few days, and I don't remember where they went. Ever since then, too, I've been having nightmares and sleep paralysis, but the odd thing is that I only ever have the nightmares and the sleep paralysis when I sleep in my bedroom. When I sleep anywhere else, like the couch or my parents' room, the guest room, wherever, my brother's room even, it never happens. When I have these nightmares, though, they take place usually in a darker version of my bedroom, and it's like I'm stuck in one place and I can't move. I also see that thing that I saw, the black figure, and it just stares at me until I wake up and have the sleep paralysis. When I have sleep paralysis, I'm unable to move at all, and that includes opening my eyes. Like, I'll try to open my eyes, but I just cannot do it. And I feel a weight on my back as well. I sleep on my stomach. I'll hear a voice whispering, but I'm never able to understand what it's actually saying. I also hear what sounds like maybe a broken music box. It'll be playing on repeat, but it sounds old and broken. I'm also able to feel something touching me, like scratching, pinching, choking, and even stabbing. It's like someone is wrapping their hands around my neck and trying to choke me. When it's stabbing, it feels like something is trying to cut my neck open, like shoving a sharp object into my neck. Whenever it happens, it always tries to hurt my neck, like that's the only place that it goes after. Anyway, today as I'm sharing this, I've had the most terrifying experience with my nightmares or sleep paralysis that I'd ever had. I had just got done studying and decided that I was going to take a nap. Originally, I planned to sleep in the guest room since I've been sleeping there for about a year now, due to my sleep paralysis. But my parents wouldn't allow me to do this and said that I needed to get over whatever strange fear I have of my bedroom. I tried to nap on the couch instead, but again, they wouldn't let me. So I went into my room and tried to sleep. Eventually I did fall asleep, and that's when I woke up in a dream. I could immediately tell that it was a dream as well, and that's never actually happened to me before. I was in a dark room that looked like my bedroom, and I heard growling sounds. I was trying to wake myself up, but the growling sounds just got louder until eventually I did wake up. When I woke up, I realized that I was having sleep paralysis, and I got pretty frightened. I heard that broken music box again playing, and I felt like I was about to cry. I felt that some weight of someone sitting on my back and hands wrapped around my neck and started choking me again. I also heard a voice, but it wasn't the same whispering voice this time. It was screaming at me, saying that it was going to kill me, and that I wasn't welcome here and I needed to leave. Like, this time I actually heard what it was saying. This went on for over a minute, and usually when this happens, it only lasts for like 20 to 30 seconds. It's never happened for this long before. When I finally was able to move, I got up and ran to the guest room immediately, and I just bawled my eyes out. I really don't know what to do as well. I've tried explaining it to my parents, but they don't believe me and they think that I'm making it up for attention. The only one who actually believes me is my brother. He slept in my room once just to see if the same thing would happen to him while I slept in the guest room, and as expected, yep, it happened to him too. At this point, it's official that my room is being haunted by some weird demon or something. And I'm here to ask all of you, what do I do? After this, I'm never stepping foot in that room again, unless it's absolutely needed, and I'm definitely never sleeping in there ever. My brother offered to help me move my stuff into the guest room this weekend, which I'm really thankful for, but the only issue is that I have to convince my parents to actually let us do that. I've been a CNA for 6 years now, and I've had lots of paranormal experiences during the night shift, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. At the first place I worked, I got a call lights in a room where someone had recently passed away in. I was the only person working in that part of the building. When I got to the room, it was locked like usual. When I unlocked it and went in, the cord on the wall was pulled and needing to be reset, but no one was actually in there. The same place had an activity room as well, with a couple of armchairs and a couch. I was laying on the couch one night playing on my phone and had my pager sitting next to me when it suddenly flew off the couch so fast, like someone had actually smacked it as hard as they could. That same place also had a basement that had motion detection lights in the rooms. I walked into the first room to grab something, and when I walked back out, every single room in the hallway had the lights on. You could always hear people running up and down the halls or even across the ceiling, but if you ever went to investigate, no one was ever there. But the scariest time, though, was when I was working a bunch of double shifts and decided to take a nap in the break room in the basement during my lunch break. I had sleep paralysis where I was stuck on the couch, and there was an old man in the corner of the room watching me, but keeping his face hidden from me, it seemed. I tried to move and get away and managed to break free and run out of the room a couple of times, only to suddenly appear back on the couch all of a sudden. I know that sounds weird, but it's really the only way I can describe it. However, the second my break ended at 30 minutes, I was suddenly able to move. I sat up, and as soon as I did, the lights went out. They were on a timer though, and really should have turned off after 5 minutes, but they seemed to stay on the entire time until my break had ended, as if they had detected the person in the corner the whole time. The last crazy thing that I experienced was at a news center that I was working at. I would always hear doors opening and slamming shut, or a lady's voice yelling at the end of the hallway, "Is anybody here?" But when I check all the rooms, everyone would be asleep in their beds. At that same facility, I went into a room to help someone use the bathroom. When I got him sat up on the edge of his bed, I had him grab my arms and I said, "I'm going to help you stand up so that we can use the toilet real fast, okay?" And a woman right behind me, almost as if she was leaning over my right shoulder, said, "Okay," in reply. I whipped around like nobody's business, but when I did, obviously nobody was there. Now, I know experiences like this aren't uncommon at these facilities, but I'm wondering if any of you guys have any similar experiences, even if it is completely unrelated to these sorts of places. So, according to what I've been told, I wasn't born alone. I had another spirit with me, and I'll explain how I found that out. So I've never felt like I was from Earth, and I never really felt human as well. I always worried about where I came from and what is my mission on Earth. Mind you, this is when I was a kid. I don't think like this anymore. I was a very spiritual kid though, and one of those kids who say weird things to their mum about their past lives and all that. I've also had vivid dreams and have had deep interest in them as well. So keep this info handy as it will become important. Now, I was also constantly afraid of being watched growing up. I used to worry that a spirit was watching me when I went to sleep. With time, I randomly started to worry that a ghost girl was sitting on my bed and watching me, and it felt a bit too real for me at that time. I had many nightmares that someone was chasing me, especially a dark figure, and when I woke up, I usually run out of my room. Then, when I was about 11, this dark figure actually caught me for the first time. I was forced to look at its face. It was a girl, similar to the one that I had imagined sitting on my bed. She held me in place and asked me to do something for her, and if I did it, she would let me move away. I didn't even listen before agreeing because I was so scared. She laughed and jumped at me, which made me wake up in my first sleep paralysis. I remember looking around with just my eyes, unable to move my body, and seeing the girl laying down next to me. After that, I constantly had dreams about her as well. And not only dreams. Sometimes I could interact with her by just closing my eyes. I would get into a sort of trance and she manipulated my mind, it felt like. And yes, I know that sounds really weird, but that is the best way that I can describe what actually happened. If I closed my eyes and I imagined her, my imagination would soon become extremely vivid, almost like reality, I guess, and she controlled herself in my imagination, like I couldn't control what she did in the way that I imagined her. She would often just smile and give me jump scares, literally jumping and grabbing me. It always left me with a weird sensation all over my body. I felt as if I was vibrating, in fact. I also had a few out-of-body experiences. One time I was just sitting down and stood up, but instead of standing up with my physical body, I seemed to have been standing up in my spirit, I guess. I turned around and saw myself, then re-entered my own body. It was a very scary moment, and there were a bunch of people around me when it happened, so I just had to pretend like nothing happened. That's how I remember it anyway. I was still a kid, like I said before, and it could have another explanation, I know that. Anyway, after a few years, my mum called a medium to help me with my situation. I honestly didn't understand much of what happened in my sessions with that medium, but for some reason, the girl just stopped appearing to me after them. My mum didn't explain it all to me until I was a bit older. But she told me that the medium found out that the girl that I interacted with was apparently a spirit from a past life that I'd had, someone who loved me and she was still attached to me, so she couldn't move on. She wanted to stay with me, so she chased and grabbed me. That would explain why I was so spiritual and sort of felt disconnected from the world. I had someone from my past life right there, always by my side. I don't know about any of that, but what I do remember is that after that medium arrived and I did whatever I did with her, everything just seemed to stop, which is a bit weird, right? What do you guys think? Do you think that there's any validity to these stories and these things that happened to me? Or do you think that it was all in my head? So something really weird happened to me last night, and I wanted to share or get some opinions. So, I had my longtime bestie E over last night for a bit of a chill session. She and I have been friends since around 6th grade, and spent a lot of time at each other's childhood homes. We grew up in an area that was formerly a Native American settlement, and across from her house was an old structure, specific to a certain tribe of her region, and a museum or welcome center on the acres and acres of protected land. The land that she lived on undoubtedly was also sacred land that had been pieced off and sold. Now, we had many experiences in her house, and she and I got to reminiscing about them last night. Her sister had brought up an incident where E and I had been smoking in her room out of the window. E's bedroom was upstairs, and this window sort of looked down at her sister's room on the ground floor. Her sister's room had a sliding glass door to it. E and I peacefully sang along to Kid Cudi as V, her sister, came charging up the stairs screaming. She burst into the room and we guiltily sort of looked at her, bowl in hand, like she had come up to bust us for being delinquents. Instead, though, she yelled at us for scaring her. We had no idea what she could have been referring to, as we'd been upstairs minding our own business the whole time. But apparently V had heard knocking on a sliding glass door and called to us, but there was no answer. She then heard something scream and pound on her door inside, and then run away. She assumed that it was us, and all three of us after that. She assumed it was us, and all three of us spent the rest of the night pretty terrified after that. All three of us remembered that incident well as well, and I mentioned to E that I'd had an experience in the house that I'd always thought that it was a dream that I didn't think that I'd told her about. She asked what it was, and I told her that one night after we'd fallen asleep playing PlayStation on the couch, I had awoken in the middle of the night to see a figure walking through her yard, out the bay window. She paused, looked concerned, and asked what the figure looked like. I told her that it looked like, in my estimation, an old hag, and at that, she gasped, because apparently she had been awake that night too, and had seen the same thing. She hadn't said anything because she didn't think anyone would believe her. My husband was shocked that we had never actually talked about it, and the energy was palpable. We both were on the verge of tears when we were discussing this, and it's been probably 15 years and we just never talked about it. I really didn't want to accept what I had actually seen, and I still don't. I acknowledge the validity of the paranormal, but that thing was like a Scooby-Doo villain. It was just too vivid to have been real. I can still picture it very vividly in my mind, and it was not a brief encounter by any means. As I peeked over the back porch, trying to appear asleep, an old crone came staggering out of the wooded, swampy area toward the window. She wore dark, tattered clothing. She came all the way to the window and stood in it, looking at us. I sort of clenched my eyes shut and tried to pretend like I hadn't seen her, and I didn't open my eyes again until the morning. I do sometimes wonder if maybe someone was pranking us the whole time, but the list of suspects is very thin. Also, who is waiting out in the dark like that to scare two preteen girls that they don't know, dressed like a SFX swamp hag? In any case, we both seem to very vividly remember it. This was also in the time before viral shock pranks, so we just really don't know what to make of it. When I was between 10 and 13, I don't remember exactly. One day I stayed home from school because I felt a little bit unwell. I was laying in bed and I clearly remember seeing two people float over me. One was a male dressed as a soldier. He was wearing head-to-toe camouflage, including a hat and brown boots. Behind him was a woman with long dark hair wearing a wedding dress. They floated over me and just went straight past me, and they were sort of slightly transparent, I guess, and I only saw them for about 3 seconds and then they were gone. I remember being extremely spooked, but quite quickly writing it off as a dream. I never really thought much of it after that, but I never forgot about it either. Anyway, a couple of years ago, so about 5 or 7 years after I saw them, I was having a conversation with my mum about paranormal activity and ghosts. She was telling a story about how the lampshade in my brother's room once was swinging like crazy, even though nobody was moving. The doors, the windows were closed, etc., and there was just no explanation for it. And this is when I told her my story about seeing the soldier and the woman. She found it fascinating, and this is when she told me, before we lived in our house, an old couple lived there. The man was apparently a soldier who fought in World War II. They lived here until they passed away. And I mean, like what, right? I mean, our house is over 100 years old, pretty common in England. But I had no idea about any of this until this moment. Ever since I found that out, though, I truly believe what I saw was real. Maybe I did dream it, but even if it was a dream, I really think that it must have been them. Also, I want to add as well that the lampshade in my bedroom, it swings constantly. No window or door open, no one moving in the room, no fan or anything. Everything in the room is still, but my lampshade, it swings often as well, switching directions and going faster then slower. I fully believe that there is something living in that house, and I'm okay with it, I guess. I mean, they've never caused me any harm. I just wanted to share my story, though, and see if anyone has experienced anything similar. I find it all really fascinating, and if I hadn't have experienced what I had, I probably wouldn't believe either, but now I just cannot after what I've seen. So I've played with Ouija boards numerous times with different friend groups, and nothing interesting has ever really happened. We'd either get no response or it would just spell out random things. This past Thanksgiving, a friend came over and after eating dinner, we wanted to give the Ouija board thing a try. Just a quick note about us too. My friend is an ex-Mormon who doesn't believe in the paranormal, and although I'm open to the idea of the paranormal phenomena, I have yet to personally experience anything that would be truly convincing, I guess you could say. Before beginning though, we set our intentions to speak with positive spirits only, and we agreed not to do anything obnoxious or weird like making fun of the board or spirits or asking questions that we shouldn't, like when will I die, how will I die, etc. And to my surprise, the planchette began moving shortly after we asked our first question, and the connection seemed consistent from there. The atmosphere was relaxed and warm, and among an array of questions, we asked questions about the individual that we were communicating with, and we also asked questions about ourselves that we knew the other person wouldn't know, and the board answered accurately. We were trying to think of some more questions when it started spelling out, "Help me," but with 2 L's. I know that this sounds so cliche, and if I ever write horror stories, I'm absolutely using this in a plot, but the chill environment became a bit eerie following this, and we asked with slight apprehension, "How can we help you?" And it responded, "Quit." My friend looked genuinely nervous, and I felt on edge as well. We agreed to listen to the response, but only after we asked one final question. We asked if it could share why it wanted us to quit. The first letters were SH, and I assumed it was going to tell us to shut up, but instead of going to the U, it ended up spelling SHATAN, like Shatan. My friend looked confused, and I asked her if she knew what the word meant, and she said that she didn't. I then told her that it could mean Satan in Arabic and explained that it's a classification of jinn in Islam. If the board meant Satan, as in the pitchfork dude, then we both already knew what that meant. Either way, it wasn't good, and we kept our promise to stop after that last question. We made sure to thank the spirit for talking to us, and we said goodbye before closing the session. We know about the effect or explanations about connecting with the subconscious, but I think that it was particularly eerie that, 1, it started responding as we tried to think of more questions. 2, we both thought the board would spell out shut up as it went to SH, but instead it spelled Shaitan. And all in all, it was a really interesting experience, but perhaps superstitiously, I almost feel like it was a warning, like it was warning me to not keep messing with the Ouija board, provided that it truly was something supernatural and not that subconscious stuff. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts about what you think about all of this and whether or not I should give it a go again. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city and found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted to or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself is great as well. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides, with my front door being at the start of the corridor. My bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex walking, talking, etc. from my bedroom, and any room for that matter, really. Last week, though, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, around 10:15 or 10:30ish, and I had the day off, so I took a shower and hopped into bed to watch some Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knock coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so, and just thought that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when, once again, I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed, went to the door and looked through the peephole, and sure enough, it was pitch black. I once again shrugged it off and went back to my room, but before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder knocking at my door. At this point, I thought that it was my friends playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking on my door, and if he was, then it wasn't amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at like 7:30. I believed him and hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty ticked off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing. I then unlocked the door and took a peek and closed the door and locked it. Me being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking. So I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and ran out the apartment to the hall. I heard someone booking it down the steps and heard him, supposedly, lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall, so I ran a few steps down before realizing that whoever this was waiting behind the corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and called the cops. They were there within a few minutes and scanned the building and the street, but couldn't find anyone. They told me that it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone like that. They kept a patrol car around the entire night and the knocking stopped. Now, it could have been some dumb kids, I suppose, but the part that gave me the creeps was the fact that whoever this was ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner like that. He didn't keep running. If it were some pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few days, because I just expected to be jumped by someone when walking into my apartment, but so far, nothing has come of it. I have let it go at this point, but I just hope that it doesn't happen again. I was living in a flat share on the outskirts of a city which is known for generally being very safe. A key is needed to enter the main building, but often the door isn't shut properly, and so it doesn't lock. It's not really a cause for concern for anyone in the building, as it's a very trusting neighborhood. But anyway, it's around 2 a.m. and I'm laying in bed naked, completely sprawled out. when someone opens my door and enters. I figure it's one of my flatmates going to the balcony. You have to walk through my room to access it, so it's completely normal that someone might come in at that time. I've just smoked a spliff and it's 2 a.m, so I opt to ignore him and pretend to be asleep. I can feel him standing there for about 2 minutes though, and I think maybe he's waiting for his girlfriend to join him, and maybe he's stood there checking his phone. No big deal. He goes onto the balcony. Takes about 2 or 3 minutes, so I figure it's definitely him. I mean, he's smoking a cigarette. He comes back in and goes back to standing in total silence, but I'm half asleep at this point and don't really think much of it. Anyway, the next morning, my flatmate tells me that apparently someone broke in. Well, sauntered in, I suppose. Came into my room, went into the room of my flatmate, and rummaged through his things, went into the kitchen, and upon seeing my flatmate wake up and come to see what was going on, quickly exited the building. Weirdly, the only thing that he stole was my pair of Marshall headphones. We were all very confused as to why they stole only my headphones, as opposed to money left on the table or my flatmate's multiple cameras, for example. We eventually spoke to our neighbors, of which there are around 15 in the building, and none of them had noticed anything out of the ordinary. They hadn't gone into any other apartments, in other words. We know that most of the neighbors also don't lock their doors at night as well, so it sounds as if they walked up 3 flights of stairs, ignored the other apartments, with the sole intention of coming to ours, and given the stealth, it's unlikely that they were intoxicated and it was just a mistake. Nothing else ever came of it, but the police said that they would keep an eye out, and I had to buy a new pair of headphones. But it left me thinking about what would have happened had I opened my eyes and alerted this person standing over me. Would they have hurt me? Would it have been a total stranger, or maybe someone who I've already met? So I live on a military base in MD, USA. This occurred around 3 in the morning. I had no trouble falling asleep in the first place that night, but I do remember tracking a white circular light, even with my eyes closed, right before I nodded off. After the experience, I was awake for probably an hour before getting back to sleep again. So I was sleeping when I felt someone's hand pressing on my butt, left cheek specifically. I thought it was one of my kids come into the bed, so I shooed it away and lifted my blanket up so whoever could crawl in with me. But then a hand pressed real firm on the same left cheek, like it wanted my attention right that moment. I got up on one elbow, no kid in bed, doors closed, so I'm looking around like, what the? Then, right there, right at the foot of the bed, standing 4 foot tall, unmistakable silhouette, large head, small body, just right there. I sat straight up, and when I did, the other one moved. It was right next to me, looking over me. I didn't notice it when I first turned around, but when I sat up, it moved up and away from me, like it had haunched over me and its face was right next to mine. It had to be 7 foot tall at least, tall and thin, but its head was proportionate to its body. It was dark, so I couldn't see many features, just movement and shape, but they didn't look solid, like they had this swirling liquid smoke moving across their bodies. I think that they maybe were partially cloaking themselves or whatever. It looked like in between the liquid smoke, though, there was nothing, like little swirling liquid windows that I could see the wall and carpet and dresser through. So, I'm sitting straight up looking at the small one. I wasn't scared, I guess, but my senses were all the way up. I think fear might have been trying to creep up, and I didn't want to ruin whatever the moment was about to be. I said, "Are you really here?" in my normal volume voice, and it slowly started to move backwards. I saw that and lurched towards it as fast as I could, and stretched my arms out, wildly grabbing to where it was, but I missed it. I then watched it phase out of sight, Both of them, in fact. The whole experience lasted mere seconds, but whatever it was, they woke me up and they wanted me to see them, to know that they were there. Honestly, I feel like it was a bit of a gift. It was an absolutely remarkable experience, and I actually hope that they show themselves again. This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started. It was early 2020 and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, around a 40-minute drive, and my sister pretty much rented it for free to me. I just paid for the water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten pretty used to it, when one night, after coming home from work and parking my car as I walked towards my door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up, thinking that it might have been mine since I am a smoker, but after looking at the brand name, I realized that it wasn't mine and threw it away. I didn't think too much of it and just shrugged it off as some person throwing it at my curb. I went on with my night though, and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts, this time near my porch though. Needless to say, I was pretty ticked off and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked. But since I didn't know who it was, there was really nothing that I could do about it. I noticed though that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop and it was pretty late, past 1 in the morning, so I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood and it was COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think too much of it again. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about as their voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze though mid-step, as I heard the two approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was, they wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob being shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to the window to see if they had walked away or changed their mind. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you could move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback because leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically stuttered over his own steps as he jumped back. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on right away and started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while, I was staring at them frozen in fear and trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it though and slammed the bars over my window, locking them and running up the stairs to the storage room where I pushed a table up to the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows being shaken aggressively. When they realized that they couldn't get in, one of them let out a really long, angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. But by the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't keen on staying there, so shortly after, I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. So this happened in the summer of 2000. My friends JF and JD for short, and I all grew up in a small town in Ohio. We frequented the woods behind our homes, and we would play games like hide and seek or capture the flag very often with other neighborhood kids. Needless to say, we all knew the woods like the back of our hands at this point. Now one day, while bored, JF and I decided to go hiking in the woods. We did this all the time back then, mind you. About 30 minutes into the hike, we stumbled upon an area with 8 perfectly lined up pine trees, with a small white house hidden behind the pines. We had never seen these trees or house before in this area, so we were pretty confused. The other weird thing too was that we could see no trails or driveways leading to the property, so we had no clue how this house could have been built out in the middle of the woods like this. The house, from all outward appearances, seemed to be in good condition for the most part and mostly unassuming. We both started getting an uneasy feeling though, and decided to turn back and leave the area and head back home. Segue to a couple of weeks later though, I'm over at my friend JD's house to play some PS2. At some point we started talking about the woods, and he tells me about a little white house he came across in the woods. He goes into detail about the same rows of pine trees and how he got a creepy feeling when he got close to the house and he split. And I then told him about how JF and I stumbled upon the same house, it sounded like, a couple of weeks earlier and got the same feeling. Later that weekend, all 3 of us decided to go back to the woods to go and explore this house. We spent, I would say, a good 4 to 6 hours combing every inch of those woods, but we just could not find that house or the rows of pine trees again anywhere. And I mean, they weren't just missing. There was no trace that the house or trees were ever even there to begin with. To this day, all 3 of us still get the heebie-jeebies when we recall that summer and the mysterious house in the woods. So, I'm a hardcore atheist, never believed in anything spiritual or otherworldly, but I can assure you that I saw this thing with my own eyes from maybe 1.5 meters away. Almost 20 years later, it is still the only thing that I've ever experienced that I have no explanation for, other than, holy cow, I saw a grey alien. So I was skateboarding along a road in rural western Massachusetts at like 11 p.m. No streetlights, no traffic. The moon was out that night and provided enough light to see reasonably well. I was skating between 2 small towns in Berkshire County, and there were no buildings or man-made structures anywhere nearby, just the woods on either side of the road. I hit a rock or a little pothole or something, and I fell, and skateboard flew forward maybe 20 feet ahead of me and off the road. I got up and jog up to it, bend down and pick it up off the grass, and as I straighten back up, I see it. All grey skin, hairless, about the size of an 8-year-old child maybe. It had humanoid features and wasn't wearing any clothes. It was crouched down and hunched over atop what I want to say was a small tree stump. I didn't really pay attention to what it was sitting on, so I can't be sure, but it was in a squatted stance with its knees to its chest, looking downwards towards the ground, approximately where my skateboard had landed. It looked emaciated though, sickly. It was sitting at roughly a 90-degree angle from me, so I was getting a profile view. I could see the outline of its ribs clearly, and the notches in its spines running down its back. I could see the outlines of its shoulder blades through the skin. I want to say its ears were slightly pointy, like elves' ears. I can't remember that detail very clearly, but I'm fairly certain that it did have small pointed ears. Weird that part is fuzzy in my memory too. Anyway, before I even truly registered what I was seeing, this thing then moves. It lifts its head from looking downwards and turns to face me. We made eye contact and I felt literally frozen. Its eyes weren't black. They were grey, a slightly darker shade of grey than the skin, I guess. And they had what I can only describe as depth. They were mostly human-looking eyes, though, only it was as if they had a sparkly grey iris with no pupil. I was completely frozen just staring into its eyes. It felt like looking into space or something. It was like there was some kind of movement happening behind the cornea, like cosmic bodies moving or stars twinkling or swirling. I've never seen anything like it, so it's really hard to describe this. I remember thinking afterwards, though, that it kind of felt like looking into a universe or something. It was almost hypnotizing. I'm pretty sure there's a scene from the remake of Stephen King's It where Beverly is staring into the monster's mouth and there are sort of dancing lights inside, and she goes into a trance. I've never read the book, but I remember seeing the movie in theaters and thinking, holy cow, that's what the Grey's eyes look like. In any case, I was completely frozen for several seconds, just locking eyes with it. Not sure if it was holding me in place or if it was just the shock and the fear, but it felt like it was literally peering into my soul, though, like it was somehow knowing everything about me. I cannot really describe what was going on inside of my head. It was one of those moments where time slowed down, like being in a car accident, I guess. It had a strikingly humanoid face, though. Small mouth, tiny lips. I could see the outlines of its cheekbones. It had no facial expression whatsoever, though. Completely blank stare, cold and uncaring. I did not sense any warmth or empathy from it at all, but also no outright hostility. Cold would be the best word to use, I think, and it definitely felt dangerous, that's for sure. It didn't look grotesque or monstrous or anything like that. I guess it could almost be described as slightly good-looking. There was almost something beautiful about it, as cheesy as that sounds. Naturally, I was not thinking I'm about to clap some alien cheeks at the time because I was terrified, and after what was probably only a few seconds of locking eyes with it, I screamed, jumped backwards into the road, and ran away in a panic as fast as I could. To this day, I still question whether or not I hallucinated the whole thing, but I was completely sober, not sick with a fever or anything out of the ordinary, and I've never had hallucinations or anything like that before or since then. This wasn't just a glimpse, mind you, as well. I mean, I had a totally unobstructed view, and I saw this thing move and stare at me with those sparkly grey portal eyes. It was, hands down, the freakiest experience of my whole life. As a closing remark, I'll say that since I did mention that it was nude, and since I'd certainly want to know what alien genitalia looked like if I was in your position, that unfortunately, I didn't get a look at whatever was between its legs. It was crouched or hunched in such a way that its little thighs obscured its crotch, so sorry to disappoint. I cannot confirm if it was male or female or what. The house was built in 1922. Unsure exactly of all of its past history, but when I was little, I had oftentimes had these dreams where I would wander through my house in the nighttime, trying to find something or perhaps someone. The dream would always end when I find a tall, dark figure, nothing but a silhouette standing in the middle of my kitchen, exposed by the overhead light over the kitchen sink that hadn't even worked for years before. It was always in that dream, though. I would wake up sometimes hearing these voices, not angry or any emotional, but usually just 2 to 3 voices talking mid-sentences of audible English words that were distinguishable but didn't make sense of much, really. Sometimes I would even wake up frozen, like I couldn't breathe or move, but simply lay there with my eyes wide open for a few seconds while still hearing the voices speak briefly. My mother has always experienced things as well as my older sister. My mum hearing a jingle or eerie hymn coming from the back of the refrigerator, or maybe the pantry late at night sometimes. Things would turn on or off, and it was just a series of weird stuff. The year was 2001 though. I was 8 years old, when one night my mother woke up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. She was frozen in her steps in the hall when greeted by a deep, hollow and loud voice right in front of her, that of a man saying slowly and forced out, "Don't worry, everything will be all right." She turned on the lights and looked around, but didn't see anything. It was a snowy night, and she took a look outside, and there were no fresh footprints where anyone would have been around the home. She woke my dad up though to go investigate the voice, but my dad didn't believe in ghosts or anything of the sort. He came into my room and grabbed my wooden baseball bat, and it woke me up. I remember worrying for my dad and what was happening and wanted to go downstairs. I hadn't heard the voice in the hall myself. I just sort of stayed awake and listened, but eventually I fell back to sleep. I only heard of this story later on when I was a bit older and had finally knew that my dad came in for the bat that night for the reason that he did. My dad found nothing out of the ordinary, mind you, but my mum's father had passed away that previous year of a heart attack, and my dad's mother was suffering and dying of cancer at this time too. My mum seems to think that the message was in reference to those events. Throughout the years, my mum and sister would experience, most of which was lights on and off, and sometimes an eerie jingle from the kitchen at night. But fast forward to 2018. My parents are divorced and the house has been vacant for 2 years now, just to be heated during winter months. My wife and I decided to move in to rent from my dad since we were tired of the apartment living lifestyle, and the first night that I moved in and was unpacking, I immediately felt a strong presence of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling too, and as my wife was working overnights at the coffee shop and I was alone, it happened a fair bit. The next day is when it started to all happen again as well. I got up for morning shift at 4:30 and I was brushing my teeth just in the other room. My wife woke up to a voice that said Earl. She asked me if I had said it, and I in fact didn't. Like I said, I was brushing my teeth at the time. I thought to myself though, oh no, here we go again, but I didn't tell her that. The next morning my wife was wide awake watching Netflix on her phone. 4:15 comes around, I snooze the phone. Not long after, we hear this bizarre jingle or hymn at the foot of the bed for like 8 to 10 seconds. It was long enough for her to shake me and say my name, and I still heard it. It kind of reminded me of Take Me Out to the Ball Game from one of those little teddy bears or something. So terrified though, we both threw the lights on and searched the room, but there was nothing but boxes of clothes in our room and nothing that could have possibly made that sound. We did get the house blessed the next day, and we hadn't experienced anything too far out after that. Occasionally a light would work itself, or the stove range fan would turn on by itself. It didn't work when we tried, mind you, which was really weird. But there was also another time where me and my wife were both standing right next to each other, and I was getting a phone call from her cell, but she was using her phone and it didn't even show that she was calling me. To be honest, I was too afraid to pick it up, but sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I did pick it up. Later on, we got home and my sister moved in and had one night experienced a disembodied voice at the end of her bed, just whistling the tune to the TV show that she had just finished watching. She had also taken videos and several orbs just floating around. I just asked her the other day if she experienced anything lately, and she says that she doesn't anymore. Her and her boyfriend are in a good and happy place in life for the moment, and she seems to think that this could be why she isn't experiencing weird things anymore. She also told me that she thought that the house was some sort of portal where many spirits would come through. I'm not sure what to think about that, but after me and my wife both hearing that hymn, it definitely must be something. Have any of these events ever happened to you? And what did you do about them? My husband and I live in a beautifully restored 100-year-old craftsman home in the oldest neighborhood of Houston, Texas. We've lived here for about 3 years, and in this time have experienced odd occurrences that we're unable to explain. Until today, we would joke that it must be a ghost, but never really believed it. But now, I don't know, I'm not so sure. I would like to get your opinion on these things, but is there a way that we can test for energies or anything in our house or something? I feel a bit silly asking that, but I would really genuinely like to know because I would like to get to the bottom of this. So first, about 2 months after moving into the house, I was in our upstairs guest room and our large, 7-foot-tall, heavy wood frame, maybe 75 pounds. A mirror, which was securely leaning on the wall, fell on top of me and pinned me against the bed. Thank goodness that my husband was home to help me get out from under it, because otherwise I would have been completely stuck. I wasn't hurt, but I definitely was really confused as I was just walking by, and in the past, when I've unleaned it, it took a lot of muscle to move it. On 2 occasions, with different guests, staying in the same guest room as where the mirror is, maybe 9-ish months apart from the previous story, they have told me while they were wide awake that they felt like someone sat on the bed, or like a cat jumped on the bed or something, only to realize that they were alone in the room. On another occasion, while I was outside gardening this past fall, I felt someone firmly push my back, which caused me to stumble. I was certain as I was turning around that there was going to be someone there, but when I did, I was completely alone. My husband thinks that I simply lost my balance, but I very clearly felt something touch my back. That I'm sure of. But there was nothing around. I couldn't have actually bumped into anything. It was clearly behind me too, but again, there was just absolutely nothing there. Like I was just in the middle of a field, basically, where there was nothing around me. And this brings us to today, which for me is the hardest one to ignore. So this morning, around 7 a.m., I heard 2 thuds about 10 minutes apart. After the second thud, I got up to let my dog out since they also woke him, and while he was outside, I investigated the sound. The cat was in our bedroom asleep with my husband, and there wasn't anybody else in the house. But I briefly looked around downstairs and didn't see anything, so I assumed it must have been something outside. I got my dog and went back to sleep, and fast forward to around 7 p.m., I went upstairs to get my stepson's 10-month-old bedroom ready for his arrival. His dad was picking him up. He's with us every other weekend. And I had found that 3 of his books had fallen off of his bookshelf. I believe that these were the series of thuds that I heard this morning, but there are some things that just make it extra peculiar. Like firstly, the books were a series of 4, and I had organized them in order when I placed them 2 weeks ago. Books 1, 2, and 4 had fallen, and the 3rd book remained perfectly intact and erect on the bookshelf. The second thing is that they fell in at least 2 series minutes apart, not all at once. Thirdly, they fell pretty far out from the bookshelf. As a former physics major, I'm pretty certain it would have taken quite a bit of force to get them to land as far away as they did, and nothing had fallen behind where they were on the shelf that could have knocked them over like that. And lastly, for those who are curious, the bookshelf is securely attached to the wall and has many books and nail tacks and didn't appear to have been moved. The books also have an inch of clearance between them and the edge of the shelf, so I don't know, none of this makes any sense. This is strange, right? A few years ago, I had one of the most strangest experiences that I've ever had. So, I exited my train onto the station platform late at night and realized that the only other person there was a tall, thin man with a hood pulled over his head who stepped out of the train car behind me. I didn't like this. I didn't like the idea that he could sneak up on me, so rather than run ahead, because I knew that with my short corgi legs anyone could easily overtake me, I looked around the platform for places where I could brace myself against something if he tried to throw me onto the platform, like a trash can or a stairway. When I saw some benches ahead of me, I began to slow down, hoping that the best case scenario, that he would just walk past me, was going to be the case, so that I'd no longer have a potential serial killer attacking me from behind. Or worst case scenario, I would at least be emotionally prepared for whatever came next. He, unfortunately, slowed down as I slowed down though, and when I realized that he was unlikely to walk past me, I just stopped suddenly and did the "oh no, did I lose my keys" pat down, thinking that I could force him to walk past me. He walked until he was directly next to me, turned, and just said, "Are you smart?" He didn't ask, he said. His delivery was sort of flat, I guess. No inflection. It sort of sounded a bit like a statement, not a question. His face was expressionless, and I thought of the Japanese slit-mouth ghost who would ask you if you thought that she was pretty, and if you said yes, she would kill you for lying, and if you said no, she'd kill you for being so rude. The only way to wriggle out of possible death was to give a confusing answer, and while she stood there racking her brain, you could make your escape. I stared back at him and said, "Huh?" I made my eyes as wide and as vacant as possible. He scoffed and repeated, "Are you smart?" I blinked and repeated, "What?" He got a little closer and said, "You look smart, so are you smart?" I shrugged with my palms up. I literally made the confused emoji pose and squeaked a noise that sounded like the Scooby-Doo whine or growl. He abruptly turned and walked angrily away. I stood for a while watching him, and to keep that same safe walking distance behind him, I did my pocket pat-down again, loudly slapping at my pant legs for a minute before I resumed walking slowly, and at a safe distance, too, behind him. I made sure to keep him in my field of vision while I walked the rest of the way down the platform, up the stairs, through the station, up the stairs to the street, finally tearing my eyes away when I saw that my bus had arrived. I basically ran across the street, leapt inside, scanned my fare card, found a seat, and I sat down. I looked out the window and, to my horror, he was walking alongside the bus. He slowed down as he got closer to where I was sitting, and when he was directly by my seat, he seemed to sort of pause for a bit but didn't look up, and continued walking. I was tense the entire ride home, and even when I reached my stop, I was sure that he was going to be waiting there. To this day, I'm honestly haunted by the thought of what he would have done if I'd answered yes or no to this question. It was just such a weird experience, and I just don't know what to think about it. So before talking about this, some backstory is that growing up, my parents never entertained the idea of paranormal activity or ghosts. They would always tell me to say my prayers whenever I felt uncomfortable, and that was it. But I've always been able to feel energy around me, and I'm a very intuitive person. Growing up Christian, I was never allowed anything to come in the way of that, and I myself never thought much of ghosts, supernatural beings, or anything. Deep down, though, I did know that there was truth in them, as there have been things that have happened to me as a child even that I just cannot explain. Until recently, however, when I had a whole crisis about my religion and I stopped going to church and stopped praying as much as I used to. Not that I don't believe in God, I just hated the brainwashing that used to happen at my church. I've started to rethink things. Anyway, at the start of the pandemic, I had a friend who was a very spiritual person and still is, although she doesn't practice as much anymore. She would do tarot readings and give me details of my life and people around me if I asked her for it. And at this same time, I began to discover spirituality for myself. In fact, I was sort of obsessed with tarot readings on YouTube, although I never practiced myself. But this friend would give me more information, and I found myself becoming more interested in it. I would find myself becoming more interested in it, to the point where I started becoming more aware of my surroundings, and wondered to myself if those things that happened to me as a kid were things that I imagined, or if they actually happened. Regardless of those things, of note is the ongoing, inexplicable incidents that occur in my dorm room, and the constant nightmares and weird feelings that I get at night. I'm a university student, and in late 2021, I moved back into my dorm after being home during the pandemic. We had classes as usual, but whenever I came home, I would always realize that my cupboard door would be open, even though I definitely would have closed it for the majority of the day. The door to my cupboard has a metal locking too, so it can't be opened unless force is applied, and my windows are always closed for privacy, so there's no wind that could have blown it open or anything. Additionally, when I would study at my desk, my cupboard doors would creak or my bed would creak as if someone had just sat on it. Trying to be as logical as I can, I initially passed this off as just the building being very old or something to do with the pipes, and honestly, I just chalked it up to me imagining things, but these things also started happening when another one of my friends would come over. I told her about it because, well, it was freaking me out, and it would only ever happen at night too, which was weird. The way my room is oriented though, my bed is against the wall, so when I sleep I can either face the wall or face my desk and have my back facing against the wall, and I usually tend to sleep in the latter position because I could constantly feel a sort of tickling or prickling sensation on my back, and it would always prevent me from falling asleep. I would also feel a presence if I ever slept facing the wall, or sometimes my entire scalp would sort of get the same prickling sensation. I would feel absolutely insane when this happened and wondered if there was something wrong with me in terms of my health, but after constant searching, I just couldn't find anything. As I said, this would only ever happen at night, never during the day if I took a nap, and it would never really happen if I spent the night at my parents' house. It was only ever in this room, and it freaks me out because it still happens sometimes too. I ended up telling my friends about it, and they believe me because weird stuff has happened to them too. But here's the really weird part. So, recently, I've been having terrible nightmares, and I've been waking up between the hours of 3 and 5 a.m., and I would wake up gasping or wake suddenly, sort of. Previously, there have been nights where I would wake up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason, even though the room would be dead silent and dark. In one of these nightmares, I dreamt of a white tiled floor and somebody that I knew getting their head bashed in, and there was just blood everywhere, and it was so red against the white tiles. Or in another dream, I felt as though I was being choked and couldn't scream, and I thought that this was all just sleep paralysis. Until last night, however, which is when I had the idea of sharing this story. So I had finished studying with my friends, and I was extremely exhausted as I'd already had a long day. I was laying in bed replying to messages and just scrolling for about 10 minutes, when suddenly I felt this presence above me, and I looked up, and there was this thing leering down at me with a smile on its face. It was black and shadowy with long spindly fingers. I don't know how else to describe it, but it freaked me out. I was so tired though that I didn't know what to do, and I panicked and I hid under my blanket, and I looked out a few times and it was gone, and so eventually I just fell asleep and didn't wake up until 7 a.m. A third friend who stays on my floor who has seen and heard ghosts before, she tells me the next day that she had really bad nightmares last night and tells me each of the 3 dreams. I was shocked because she explained that she never really had nightmares in the past, but last night she felt something in her room and she was unable to sleep. This all has me really freaked out, and I'm not really sure what to do about it all and how to protect myself. If you have any suggestions, then please do let me know, because this is all very new to me, and to be honest, I'm just a bit lost. So this happened about 4 months ago. I, a 22-year-old male, was waiting for my turn at the clinic with my mother. We were supposed to be next in line to go in after the patient that was already with the doctor at the time. However, that person was there for so long, almost 2 full hours, and for some reason, that's when I just had a really weird feeling that something bad might happen. While we were still waiting outside, all of a sudden, A teenage girl walked in the door with her mother, who was coughing blood and looked to be in really bad shape. Couldn't walk on her own, bloodshot eyes, bruises all over her body. The girl then asked us, there were like three middle-aged women there. There were like three middle-aged women in there and an old man in addition to me and my mum, if someone could help her mum. One of the other women that were waiting for us explained to her that it isn't a hospital and that the clinic doesn't have the proper equipment to help her mum. Then someone else told her that there's a hospital nearby with emergency services and gave her its name and location. We then quickly started gathering some money for her before they went. All that while, the mum was still bleeding on the couch near us. Once I tried handing her the money, her mum, who didn't speak a word until then, pointed at me and screamed with all the blood coming out of her mouth. It really spooked me for some reason. It sounded like one of those animal screams that you hear when an animal gets severely hurt. Once the girl had collected enough money, I then asked her who told her to come here in the first place. She said the janitor, the short man by the building's entrance, which was super weird, since the janitor that we just passed by before we used the elevator and went into the doctor's office was a strikingly tall man, and he's always the only one here. But of course I didn't think of it then. Anyways, she got the money and she was leaving with her mother. I tried helping the girl, but as soon as the mother saw me, she started screaming her lungs out again. This time she was crying as well, while still pointing at me. The girl asked the old man to help her get her mum downstairs instead, and at that point, the patient that was with the doctor had finally got out, and I immediately went in. But about 15 minutes when I was with the doctor, we heard that agonizing scream again. I was still creeped out from what had happened before, but I brushed it off, and when I was done with the doctor, I got out of the room and asked one of the women that were waiting there what that scream was, and why did they come back again. She said they came back shortly after when they couldn't find the taxi outside. Then she said the poor woman was shouting nonsense. When I said, like what? She said something along the lines of, where is he? Why is he hiding from me? Again, there were only two males in there. I was in the doctor's office while the old man was still outside, and then the old man went out with them and got them a taxi apparently, but when I discussed that with my mother when we got home, she suspected that it may have all been a hoax by the girl and her mother to scam people for charity. I guess I still don't know for sure if that was the case or not to this day, but that woman's look and the scream or pointing at me like that, man, it still gives me the creeps. When I was 14 or 15 during the summer, we used to travel up to Pennsylvania to visit my aunt and grandma. It was usually my mum, myself, and sometimes one of my sisters that would go with us. My brother and other sister would stay with my dad at home. But we usually only stayed there for maybe a week or two. Where my aunt lived, it was country, like the closest neighbor was a good ways away. And when I was up there, I would hang out with my older cousin who was 17. They lived near a huge abandoned rundown building too. You could actually see it from my aunt's house, and it had a huge amount of land. My cousin says that it was a mental hospital at one point, but my aunt says that it was a hotel, but it shut down. I've tried looking it up, but I can't find any information on the building. But what I do know is that I remember this night very well. My cousin had a girlfriend. This girlfriend had a younger sister that I was interested in. My cousin was going to sneak out and visit her, and I asked if I could go with him. He said no, but reluctantly agreed after a few pleases, and to explain the path, we went through the dirt road that was lit up by a few streetlights. It was an easy 30-minute walk. If we walked through the land by the building, it was a 10-minute walk, and he took a flashlight with him, and we made our way towards his girlfriend's house. Mind you, it was close to like 1 a.m. at this point. The way that we needed to walk, though, we had to walk by that old building, and don't know why, but it always gave me the willies walking by it. It felt like you had eyes on you, sort of. On the path there, nothing happened. We got to the house and we ended up leaving at almost 3 a.m, and I had a lot of fun. But when we were walking back, my cousin commented how eerily quiet it was. This was a rural area where you can hear bugs and the nocturnal animals. He told me to walk fast, and I made fun of him for being scared. He told me to cut it out, and I remember kicking a rock on the ground. We were probably, 100 feet away from the building when he palms my chest in a sort of stopping motion. I look at him, and he has a sort of shushing motion and points forward. His face said it all, though. In fact, I'd never seen him like that. He was not an easy person to frighten, and I look up and all I can see is something white spinning, like as if a person was wearing a dress and was spinning, like they were dancing. It was dead silent. I moved the flashlight from the ground towards the white thing, and it was a lady, super pale, black hair. But as soon as the light hits her, she stops and she kind of just evaporates. She looked like she was heading towards the front door of the building. From where we were at, we could see the streetlights on the dirt road, and as soon as this happened, we just booked it down the road. My cousin and I didn't speak of it on the way home, but when we got to his room, I asked what the heck that was, and his response shook me to the core. I don't know, man, but I saw it staring at us from one of the windows of the building when we first passed by. I just didn't want to scare you. That explained why he was so serious and didn't want to joke with me on the way back, too. I have other experiences with that building, but I'll probably share those another time. Let me know what you think of this one. So for context, I'm a complete skeptic when it comes to paranormal things, but what's been happening or going on in my home has the hairs on the back of my neck standing up straight. You see, a few nights ago, my fiancée, 21 and female, decided to go outside for a smoke. I, also 21 and female, stayed in the living room to watch Modern Family. A few minutes after she left, she texted me and asked if I had popped up in the dining room window to scare her. The dining room window overlooks her smoke area, so it would have been in perfect view of from where she was sat. She saw me, my glasses, the way that I had my hair tied back, smiling at her. She describes it as I was more so laughing at, as if she had caught me and then I ducked down and never reappeared. Keep in mind, I was sat in the living room, having no knowledge of this exchange. She came back in and we talked about it, and I literally thought that she was pranking me, bearing in mind that she was close to tears because she thought that I was pranking her. A few days passed and nothing else happened, until the other night. My fiancée went upstairs to go get changed into her pajama bottoms. I heard her steps as she went upstairs and again was left in the living room by myself. I then heard her stepping down the stairs and watched her open the door, only to hear her come down the stairs and walk through the already open door once again. This obviously spooked me, but I'm a skeptic, so I just sort of pushed it aside after explaining to my fiancé what I saw. But pan to last night. It was 3:47 in the morning, and my fiancé was using the bathroom. The bathroom is upstairs adjacent to our bedroom. I heard the bathroom door open and then proceeded to hear her footsteps descend down the stairs, only to quickly come back up like she was maybe checking to see if a light was left on downstairs or something. She texted me asking if her dad had come out of the bedroom, opposite of ours. Her dad has incredibly loud footsteps and are easy to identify. Obviously, I thought that they were her footsteps, and she was quite a skinny girl, so we both heard two different things. We have no idea what's happening in this place, but it's making us feel incredibly uneasy about being here in general. We would go someplace else, but my fiancée is ill and I'm working on getting my visa, so her parents have kindly taken us in. But what should we do? Are we experiencing doppelganger activity or something like it? And if so, how do we get rid of it? So, this is the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me. This was in the 9th grade. There was this huge state park right outside of town that I lived in. and my friend and I would go down the trails every now and then. We'd been walking for maybe, 10 minutes when we realized that there was an older woman not far behind us. I only really noticed because of how out of place she looked, like she came right out of an old folks' home and was just dropped in the woods. But we were joking around about how creepy she was and sped up a bit, put some distance between us. But every time that we did, we'd look back and we would still be able to spot her. We must have done that probably 3 times, I think. We thought it was pretty funny, but we ended up running down the trail until we got to a small bridge. We hopped off the bridge into a creek and then went around a bend. We could still see the bridge from where we were, but we were cracking up about the whole thing when we saw the old lady again. Now, we had run for a good couple of minutes. There is absolutely no way she should have been able to catch us, especially that quickly. And it was like that she knew that we got off the trail because she was sort of just standing there on the bridge looking around. I think that that's when we both stopped thinking that it was funny. Again, there's just absolutely no way that she should have been able to get there like that. As soon as she left, we took off running the other way, and that was pretty much it. Nothing else happened, but I've always just thought the whole thing was just so creepy. There's this old lady sort of stalking us down a trail where we're isolated from anything, and then on top of that, we run and she somehow catches up to us when really she shouldn't have been able to. I still can't really explain the whole situation, but whatever happened that day, something was off. Around 10 years ago, while I was still living in a small village in the south of the UK, Loxheath to be exact, I used to travel to and from work by train. At the entrance to Swanwick Station is a long and sort of thin tree-lined road. Cars would often park all the way up this road. During one summer, every day while I was going down this road, there was this horrendous sort of gassy smell that I could always smell at this particular spot. I presumed that it was a dead animal along the hedgerow that had died and not been found. I remarked on this smell every day, which seemed to grow worse and worse as the summer progressed too, but could never identify where it was coming from. Well, in the end, it turns out that someone had murdered a woman and dumped her body in the boot of a car and abandoned it along the road. So for the entire summer, whenever I passed these vehicles, I was apparently smelling the decaying body of a homicide victim that had been missing for months. I will never forget that smell, even now. So I'd gone out to lunch with my dad one day and my gas gauge was broken. I've never been good at math and I accidentally miscalculated how much gas I had left. And instead of stopping near where my dad works, I decided to wait until I got back to my town where it's cheaper, which, as you can imagine, was a huge mistake. About 10 miles later on the highway, my car comes to a halt. I pull over and I call AAA to bring me gas, and while I'm waiting for AAA, a man in a truck pulls up behind me. He asks what happened. I explain that I'm out of gas. He offers to get me some so I don't have to wait for AAA. I say thank you, that would be really good. He then tells me that I need to come with him to get the gas. I ask why, and he says that I shouldn't be on the side of the road all alone like this. He says, come on, just get in. He won't bite, and he won't get the gas unless I can trust him. Well, another motorist must have saw me stranded and called the police to help me at some point, because I see a police car pulling up and so does this man, and he literally peels out as fast as possible from the scene once he sees the police officer. Nothing happened to me, thankfully, but I can't help but look back on that event and just feel uneasy about it. I wonder what he would have done if I had gotten in his truck, or maybe if I had actually refused for a little bit longer. The whole situation, when I think about it, just gives me shivers. When I was roughly 13, a very close friend of mine invited me and my sister to come to her and her sister's birthday party at the campground. Megan and I were walking around the campground, just messing around with our sisters following somewhere behind us, doing their own thing. The adults knew what we were doing, and we live in a relatively small town, so they knew most people at the campground. So that wasn't weird for us to be allowed to walk around the loop like that, but we were passing a camper when we were nearing the pond that they had there, when Megan said that she knew the people who were staying there and that they had a girl who was close to her age and she had a brother. We stopped by and asked if the girl wanted to walk with us. She accepted and we were off again. I don't remember this girl's name, but she kept mentioning her brother and how he told her that he thought that I was so cute when we stopped by the camper. We walked to the pond, probably playing it a bit, but then started walking back towards the girl's camper. When we get there, she said to me, "Wait, my brother texted me and that he wants to talk to you." He comes out and tells me that I'm pretty and we exchange numbers. And the next day we're texting when I ask him his age, and he was an adult. I tell him that I'm 13 and he says that it doesn't matter. I can be his girlfriend still. I remember feeling really weird after that, and I just ended up blocking him after a few days of him texting me and me hardly replying, hoping that he would just stop. Mind you too, I definitely did not look like an adult at the time. It was obvious that I was young and that I was a teenager.